shouldn't talk to them. They're bad.
I know.
Live from the center of the bass fishing universe, it's time for Bass After Dark, your weekly waypoint to the best conversation and debate in all of fishing. One question, three experts, no rules, and none of the guests know who the other guests will be. All they know is tonight's question. So strap down your rods, put on your life jacket, and fasten your kill switch, because here's your host, Ken Duke.
It was 5:50 in the afternoon, and according to the sign on the tackle shop door, I still had 10 minutes to run in, grab a couple of packs of plastic worms, and be ready for my trip the next morning. But the door was locked. So I turned around, went back to my truck, and started considering other options. That's when the owner of the store drove up and stopped me. "No, we're not closed yet," he said. He sounded kind of frustrated. "My son locks up early if there's no one in the shop," even though I've told him not to do that. So I went in, got the baits I came for, and listened to the owner grumble about his son locking up early. It reminded me of a great line I read one time. I'll paraphrase it for you. What you see on the field of competition or in your business or in your home is what's being taught or what's being tolerated. That is so true. And it applies to everything, not just sports and business, your home, but also your family, your church, everything, taught or tolerated. As you know, teaching comes in many forms. Sometimes it's formal, like in a classroom setting. Other times it's informal. Employees will watch their bosses and copy their attitudes and behavior if there's no other teaching going on. Teachers and coaches are leaders because they shape performance. Whether they work formally or informally, their lessons are critical. Good teaching gets quality results. Then, of course, there's that other word, tolerated. That's what the shop owner was doing. He tolerated his son closing early on slow days. He might as well have been teaching that behavior. If we see bad performance or bad habits in our world, we are either teaching it or tolerating it. I bet you have friends who go on and on telling you about some challenge they're having with their kids. Guess what? One of the most ridiculous examples of taught or tolerated that I've ever experienced came many years ago in Las Vegas. I was walking from my hotel to the convention center with my boss and another coworker. The boss was whining about another employee that the boss managed. And he said, "I can't get him to do any work. Can you help me?" He was tolerating terrible performance and confessing to his own weakness and inadequacy as a manager. If I had any respect for him at that point, it would have disappeared in an instant. But of course, I didn't have any respect for him, and his shortcomings as a manager were really mirrored by his shortcomings in every other aspect of his life. Of course, he's been inducted into the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame. But I digress. Today, tolerance is generally portrayed as a virtue. But to me, tolerance means putting up with something that's undesirable, something I shouldn't have to put up with. I feel I have to tolerate too much these days because we're not doing a good job of teaching. I'm tired of tolerating bad behavior in society that has arisen because we haven't taught respect and decency. I'm tired of professional victims sucking the life and resources out of those who make their miserable lives possible. I'm tired of cheating in bass tournaments because we've tolerated the cheaters without choosing to make examples of them. And I'm tired of the parasites who profit from the fishing industry without contributing anything to it. Some of these problems are being taught, but most are being tolerated, and none of it comes out of the clear blue sky. It is on us to fix it. We need to take ownership of it, at least as far as we can. If we know something's wrong, we need to teach a better way, or at least stop tolerating it. Stop supporting it, stop watching it, stop feeding the parasites, stop looking the other way when we see that something is wrong. If we can do a better job of teaching, maybe there will be a lot less to tolerate, but it starts with us. Welcome to Bass After Dark. I'm Ken Duke, and we are here tonight to earn your support, your subscription, your like, your share, and hopefully even your trust by showing you that inch for inch and pound for pound, we are the most illuminating show in all of bass fishing. Now it's time to introduce my co-host. He tolerates me every week right here on Bass After Dark, but only until he can teach his Weimaraner how to wear a smoking jacket. Please welcome Brian the Carpenter.
Todd. Sound like Chris Rock, man.
That's because I'm old.
Yeah.
It's got to be because I'm old.
Yeah. I'm old too, Ken. Cheers.
I got 10 years on you.
Well, it shows. I don't know what else to say, Ken.
Oh, yeah, it does. That's all right.
Don't know what else to say. But hey, we're still here. You're here. I'm here. We're here.
We're here. And our guests are here. And we'll get them on in just a moment. But I never had to tolerate those guys. It was always a joy to deal with the three anglers who are coming on in just a minute.
Yes, indeed. And I appreciate them joining us tonight.
And tolerating.
It's fun. That's right.
Yes.
The big worm is always something, very little experience with it myself.
Well,
when it comes to fishing.
It's an awkward confession. Yeah,
yes.
but I don't think you're surprised.
Right into that one.
Yeah.
And I think half the reason we did this show is just for the message board.
The message board could be dangerous tonight, but the reason we did this show is because I think we all want to know better applications on fishing big plastic worms, especially in the summertime.
There's got to be something else to do with it.
Yeah, well, maybe. Yeah, I hear you.
All right. So we'll be doing bad comments again later tonight, giving away a Livingston bait of Ken's choice.
Of whatever I have around.
That's right.
In the garage.
And
available.
And then we'll be doing our top 10. Tonight's top 10 is dadgummit. The top 10 things only bass anglers can say and get away with.
Indeed.
And then we'll finish up tonight with Dark Thoughts. Touching on a little political.
Dark Thoughts.
A little bit.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And hey, folks, Bass After Dark is brought to you by Livingston Lures. Their electronic bait fish sound technology triggers the natural, instinctive feeding cues of fish. Unlike traditional lures that have to have beads or rattles in them to make a noise, they have to be constantly in motion to make a sound. Livingston Lures add the natural sounds of feeding or distressed bait fish, the sounds bass use to find their real food. You can find Livingston Lures at all serious tackle outlets and at livingstonlures.com.
That's right. And we're also brought to you tonight by the Bass Tank, your premier boat electronics destination from beginners to pros. They have all the latest and greatest. They'll educate you, sell it to you, rig it for you, teach you how to do it yourself. Check them out at thebasstank.com and follow their social media for deals and discounts.
Tonight, how do you fish a big worm? BTC, you handle the introductions so masterfully. Shall we get started?
Further ado, yes. He is a 3-time bass winner, a 9-time Bassmaster Classic qualifier, the only man to win tournaments on every lake, river, and creek in Texas, and the runaway leader in the Bassmaster Angler of the Year non-scoper division. Please welcome Keith Combs.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Keith, I got to admit, I wrote that intro for you because you are the hero of the non-scoper division.
Well, I appreciate that. That means a lot to me.
You're the man. Thank you so much for coming on. And I also wrote the part about you're the only man ever to win a tournament on every lake, river, creek, stream, puddle in Texas, because I'm pretty sure you've done that, and I know nobody else has. So
Texas has been good to me. So I appreciate that intro, Ken. Thank you.
Amen, man. All right, BTC, we got Keith Combs, but who else can we bring in?
We have the 1981 Bassmaster Classic champion, 16-time Bassmaster Classic qualifier, 6-time BASS winner, the man who introduced the world to Nealon and Reelin and the Alabama rig, and a Bass Fishing Hall of Famer. Please welcome Paul Elias.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Welcome, Paul. You look comfortable, man. You're in a recliner. I like it.
Yeah, man. Heck, I like taking it easy.
Good for you. Very cool. And your accolades go on and on. As a matter of fact, in 2007 on Falcon Lake, a big plastic worm was part of your 4-day catch, weighed 132.5 pounds, wasn't it, Paul?
Yes, it was. Especially the last day. I caught most of them on a crankbait before that, but that last day, that big worm really played a major role.
So BTC, we got the right panel, man, but we got one more.
That's right. He is the 2000 Bassmaster Angler of the Year, an 11-time Bassmaster Classic qualifier, and the host of Timmy Horton Outdoors. Please welcome Timmy Horton.
What's up, guys? How y'all doing?
Tim, it's been a while. So good to see you, my friend. How are things going?
Man, I'm glad to be here. It's going good. Going really good.
Glad to hear that. This is an all-star panel. And we got a lot to talk about because although I spent a lot of time throwing a plastic worm and a fairly considerable amount of time throwing a big plastic worm here in Florida, you guys have taken it to the next level. And I know BTC is very interested in the ledge fishing dimension of big plastic worms. But I got a real basic question to start with. How big is big when we're talking plastic worms?
I feel like anything, 10 inches or above, in a regular style worm, with something like a Senko type bait, maybe shorter.
And Paul, you were famous for throwing that man's jelly worm, the 10 and 12 inch jelly worm. Was that one of your go-to baits?
Yes, I've caught a lot of fish on that 12-inch jelly worm. The 9-inch too, but the 12-inch seems to really do well, especially on ledges.
Keith, how big is a big plastic worm when you're thinking about fishing the big plastic worm?
I agree with what Paul said. 10 inches or above, that's a big worm. And some of the other baits too, like a striking cutter worm, they're like an 8-inch worm, but they have a big profile with a lot of action. I kind of group that in that same category.
Gotcha. Tim, where do you draw the line between what's a big plastic worm and what's kind of a run-of-the-mill, more ordinary worm?
Yeah, I think those guys hit on it great. 10 inches, 10-inch worm is kind of rather, talking about so many of them, the man's jelly worm, the Zumo monster, a lot of them that just really transcended what people fish in the summertime. But you can even probably throw big lizards in that. I know B&M kind of started that craze years ago with a lot of companies, but they have their place in the summertime, and they will get you a big bite in the right conditions for sure.
And I guess my follow-up question to that, guys, is we're having this show at this time, kind of in middle of June here, late June, and that's the time I think of as when the big plastic worm comes into play the most. Am I making it too narrow, or is that a fair breakdown of when this is a really effective technique?
I would say for ledge fishing, yes. Late May, of course, depending on the part of the country you're in. But, if you're looking at the Tennessee River area and the Texas lakes and, most of the good ledge lakes, June is when it really starts coming into play.
Now, and that's basically the same. Are we talking about exactly the same window when the deep dive and crankbaits are effective on ledges? Is that primarily when this pattern comes into play?
Yeah, I
really
would say
think
so.
so.
I mean, I think, on ledge fishing, your May and June, mostly when the fish get out there. But, we, like a lot of times in Texas, in the fall, when it gets kind of tough, we're targeting isolated brush piles that are out offshore, and that's October, November, December. And then, man, it's not just a summertime deal, but it's probably just more thought of as a summertime bait.
Right.
Well, too, of course, like he brought up that the Strike King cutter worm, but those bigger worms, like in Florida, when we go down to Okeechobee and places like that, I mean, you swim those through the lily pad stems and over the top of the grass and stuff like that, even in January and February, but as far as fishing them on the bottom and fishing ledges, it's more of a summertime fall deal, I believe.
I really want to get into that for a very selfish reason, and that is that I live in Florida. So I want y'all to teach me everything there is to know about fishing that bait in Florida. But it seems like that is a different technique, because there you're probably imitating a snake or a lamprey rather than whatever a worm on a ledge is imitating. Now, Tim, What is, when you're throwing a big plastic worm around Tennessee River impoundments, for example, in the ledges, what is it imitating, or does it even matter?
Yeah, I think you hit it with even a lamprey. You know, we have a lot of lampreys in the Tennessee River.
Okay.
I think a big part of a big worm too is really situational. I think it works so much better in Highland reservoirs when you don't have a lot of current. You know, upriver on Table Rock, up the James or the Bear Creek Lakes, or places where you're like Raven or Toledo Bend, where you don't have a lot of current on in the summertime, as opposed to the Tennessee River where it's really yanking. And you're fishing isolated brush piles. I know Keith said that to me is the biggest advantage of a big worm. When you're bringing it through there, you can just visualize all those little minnows and brim shooting out when a big worm comes through out of a brush pile. And that's when those bass are going to jump on it. I think that, and you see it really dominate nighttime tournaments. Everywhere we live in the Southeast, there's what we call fruit jar tournaments. And those guys catch them, win on big worms a whole lot.
That's fascinating. Now, it seems like all bets are off at night. At night, that's the one time of the year, one time of the day or night, or any time that guys pick up a big single spin spinnerbait with a Colorado blade, it seems like, big plastic worm and stuff. Is it just better to have that big profile at night, make it easier to find the bait? Or is there a different reason why a big bait or a big thump on a spinnerbait is so effective after dark?
I think it's profile. I think the fish see it better, just like we like a big spinnerbait in muddy water. But there's just something magical about a big worm. If you look at Kentucky Lake when it was in its heyday, and it seems to be coming back to that. It was so good to see the other day. But you're really sometimes trying to cull 1 and 2 pound bass before they ever bite. If you got a big school and trying to get a big fish to bite, and they even throw those 16 to 20 inch worms on that lake a lot of times.
Wow.
Lake Eufaula is another one. So sometimes that's the key, is trying to keep fish from biting as opposed to trying to get a bite.
Gotcha.
16 to 20, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Upton's makes a 16. And I remember there's a guy named Carl Wengenroth in Texas who made these 24. Well, BTC used it in your promo video for this show. There you go.
This came from you. Which one's this?
That's a 22-inch plastic worm by Carl Wengenroth. And I had two, guys, just so you know. I had two. I had a red one and a green pumpkin one. Naturally, he took the best color.
Well,
so
it might actually get used over here.
Now, Carl told me that guys would occasionally actually fish that, but I've not seen an offset worm hook that would handle such a beast. Not that you got to go offset, but there you go. That's
a hell of a one.
That's for show. That sits on a bookshelf in my office. That's not. Or have you guys ever fished a 22-inch plastic worm? Tim's mentioned the 16 to 20, so I'm assuming he's throwing them.
I never have. The biggest one I've ever fished is about 13 inches that Mans was making, but it really never went to market, actually.
There was a 13-inch hog hunter worm that I'm sure Paul remembers, that was a big deal back in the early 70s. And it caught at one from 1973 till Martin Mendez broke the record in the mid-90s. That 13-inch worm had the record for the biggest bass in BASS history. Of course, Mark Tyler broke it a few years later, but that was a beast of a plastic worm. And I guess I've always been fascinated with big baits because I associate them with big fish. And Tim was talking about trying to avoid some strikes from the 1 and 2 pounders that you guys would run into. And obviously a bigger bait will help on some of that, but I'm sure you guys have caught plenty of 1 pound fish on 10 and 12-inch plastic worms.
Oh, yeah.
Is there another way that you discriminate against those little fish other than a bigger bait?
I don't know, because like you're saying, I've caught 10 and 12-inch fish on a 12-inch Mans jelly worm, but you do eliminate. I feel like you eliminate a lot of the smaller bites. It's like when you go somewhere like the Tennessee River and you've got smallmouth mixed in, you hesitate to throw that 10 or 12-inch worm because you don't want to eliminate the smallmouth bite, or but like in Texas, I would say, you know, I think you do bypass several of those bites that you would have to take time to catch and throw back. I think a lot of the fish shy away from that bigger bait.
Well, we got the king of Texas right here. Keith, do you throw the big plastic worm to try to cull out the little guys?
About the biggest I throw is really about a 12-inch worm. There was a worm that I was throwing on Amstead back in the days when I was guiding there. It was a big 13-inch, real thick, heavy worm. And like those 16 to 20-inch worms, I think it's kind of like what Paul was touching on there. That's not too big for that fish to eat, not at all.
Right.
I mean, you take that 20-inch worm that Brian's holding, you ball that up in your hand, it's a lot smaller than a 10XD or a big jig or anything like that. It's just a matter of like getting your timing down on a hook set. Like you don't know. I mean, when something hits your worm, you assume it's 5 pounds, 6 pounds. It's big, but it might be a 3-pounder that you need, So I think that's the biggest issue when you get too big, is like how long do you got to lead that fish before you set the hook? Because that's a lot for that fish to take in. One thing that I think, you can take like a 10-inch worm and change the weight size, and you can avoid a lot of small bites, So most guys would probably pick up a 10-inch worm and use a 3/8 ounce worm sinker or something like that. But a lot of times around here, if the cover will allow us to, we'll fish, a 5/8 or even like a 3/4 ounce, like big shaky head type thing or something like that. That doesn't get a lot of small bites and it's still a reasonable size that the fish can take.
I feel like I haven't nailed down where I'm trying to go on when you guys pick up the big plastic worm. I know that it's effective in the summertime. I know that it's a strong ledge bait. Keith's talking about using it on isolated brush, really almost 12 months out of the year. But a big plastic worm to me seems like an outlier type lure, like a real specialty type bait. When do you expect the big worm to be a player, and how do you go through the possible lure options before you settle on a big plastic worm? And does that question even make sense? Maybe not. Tim?
I think it does. I know this is a little different than a ledge story, but it's a real similar story that kind of fits into what you're talking about. We were at Santee Cooper. I think it was determined that Preston Clark won. And the first day I come in with 20 pounds. I mean, that was like I was almost last with 20 pounds. Everybody was really train wrecking them. And I was rooming with Kelly Jordan. I told him about all these 6-pounders I couldn't catch. And Kelly's like, man, have you ever tried a tiki lobster? And he handed me one of them. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but that thing's it's like that big around. It's just a massive lure. And I didn't even feel like I had a hook up in an extra wide gap. And went back and caught all those fish, had like 32 pounds that I couldn't catch the day before. But if you think about that from a standpoint, that was a visual that those bigger fish were wanting. And now you take it and you put it on ledges or a drop or a brush pile. I think a bigger fish just wants a bigger meal. I think that's, especially in the summertime when their metabolism's so high. We catch a bass in the summertime and we think, man, he's skinny, he ain't healthy. No, his metabolism's just cranked up, with them being cold-blooded creatures. So they're eating all day long. I think it's something you got to have in your arsenal. You got to have on your deck. I guarantee you these two guys, two of the best ledge fishermen ever, will tell you they've had a tournament that they can remember that they were throwing something. They picked up a big worm and caught a giant bass. And it's just one of those things that you're always want on the deck of your boat when you're in schools of big fish.
Tim, you really threw that tiki lobster, huh?
That tiki, look, I was trying.
I remember it.
eBay everywhere I could. I got down to where I was having to fish like this ugly red and yellow swirl one. It was like all I had.
Yeah.
And hey, I had one. And I'll tell you 2 quick stories. I followed up Prosnick on a big fish when he won at Toledo Bend, and Jacob's as good a sight fisherman as there is. And I watched him and John Cruz fish for this 6-7 pounder that I was wanting to get on and I couldn't. So I'm milling around this bay around the Indian Mounds. And I go over and I catch that fish in 10 minutes. And Menendez saw that. He talked to me like after that. And then another one with Bobby Lane, worked one for about an hour on, where were you guys just at, or they were at for in Virginia, Smith Mountain or whatever that is. Exact same deal. And those two guys, I'm not a better bed fisherman than those guys. It was just, I'm telling you, that was one of the most amazing lures that, you watch, B. High do it with a mission fish and a lot of them from out west.
Yeah.
But if you think about that from the West Coast, in big lures with swim baits, they just catch big fish, and the big worm is the originator on all of it for sure.
That's funny that you said that about Kelly Jordan, because I don't know if it was that same tournament but it was one at Sandy Cooper when they were all on the bed. Everybody was smoking them. And I was sitting in my boat talking about 3 or 4 big fish that I hadn't been able to get to bite. And Kelly Jordan comes over and he says, "Man, you ever thrown a mission fish on them?" And I said, "No." And he gave me 2 mission fish. And I went out there that next day and caught all 3 of those big fish on that mission fish. And they bit it immediately. And, I'd never even dreamed of throwing something that big on those spawning fish. And it's the same way with big fish. I think they love getting a big bluegill or something really big, because that means they get full enough to where they don't have to work as hard to get another meal, and they don't have to get another meal as quick. And it's crazy to think people throw 12-inch swim baits and stuff like that, but a 5-pound bass will bite a 12-inch swim bait in a heartbeat. And it's people don't realize. Well, if you just really look at that big bass's mouth when you bring him in the boat, he can accommodate a pretty big bait fish. So it's a matter of course, now at my age, it's a matter of my shoulders holding up throwing some of that stuff. But it does pay off, especially on a when you've already got a good 5-fish limit and you're trying to cull up. It's the big worms and big swim baits and everything is the way to go.
Well, you make a great point. All you guys have talked about providing a big worm is a big meal to these fish. And to me, we're talking about worms 10 inches and up, and several of you guys have already mentioned a big bodied bait. So it looks like a lot of a meal there. Is there a time when you would opt for something? There's a worm out there made by Upton's. It's a 16-inch worm, but it's really slender, like a garter snake kind of slender. Is there a time when you would go to a long, skinny plastic worm, or are you always looking for a big-bodied worm as well?
So the one thing, if you get into a real big-bodied worm, I mean, it just becomes hard to set the hook sometimes, because a lot of times you're fishing offshore, you're making those long casts. A worm I'm throwing a lot right now, this is it's kind of a slender worm compared to like an old monster or something like that. This is a Strike King Zeus worm, and it is kind of slender. I like it. It's 12 inches, but it's not overwhelming. And I can take a 4-aught owner hook and have plenty of bite and catch a lot more fish just because of that smaller profile. That's a drawback to your big thick worms. I mean, you want to get noticed. I think that's a big part of like listening to Tim's story and Paul's story about those fish on those beds. You could pitch something in there and that fish would see that little crawl worm or whatever, but it's just a reaction or just getting noticed. And you think about a lot of the environments that we're fishing a big worm in. Say I'm on Toledo when I'm fishing a brush pile. Well, most of those brush piles are full of life. I mean, they have crappie, they got bluegill, they are full of life. Same thing with like a ledge on Kentucky Lake. It's covered up in crawfish, it's covered up in big gizzard shad. There's tons of fish that you can see on your electronics down there. And that big, obnoxious bait, sometimes fished aggressively, is really, I think, doesn't necessarily have to imitate what they're eating. It just gets noticed, and they want it. They got to have it.
Is it a bait that you would use if you're say maybe not even in a tournament, but just out fun fishing if you're trophy hunting?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was probably, like all my days guiding on Amstead and Falcon and Rayburn, Toledo, all of those places. That's my number one thing when I have customers or somebody's down here fun fishing and you're taking a couple of your buddies out, and there's no better way to efficiently, just relax and fish a spot and still have a chance of catching really big ones.
Nice.
Here's I hope it's not a stupid question, but it's one I'd like to hear from all of you guys on this. How is fishing a big worm different in technique or method or anything than fishing a 6 or 7 inch worm in terms of the technique?
Well, personally, I don't think it really is. I think you're basically doing the same type thing. And one thing I've noticed, especially on the bigger bites, those big fish I don't think they'll drop that big worm. I think they're concentrating more on that big, they already bit that big bait and they're trying to accommodate swallowing it. And I think you can let that fish have that bait long enough to get in a hook setting mode with him, as far as the slack line or anything like that's going to be taken out, and you're going to be dead on feeling the fish, and I don't think they'll drop it. But as far as the technique of fishing it, now there are several techniques that to me are newer than, like when Biffle came out with his Biffle bug type thing, and I know I catch a lot of fish on the Tennessee River lakes with a football head with a screw in deal with that 12-inch worm, and I'll just drag it through the gravel and the shell beds and rocks and stuff, and that really triggers a lot of bites, because it's definitely got a different action. But as far as when you're just working a Texas rig worm, I don't think you work a 12-inch one any different I don't work in a regular 6 or 7-inch worm.
Tim, did you say you put it on a football head?
I said that.
Yeah,
like
a football head jig.
Yes. Well,
skirt and all?
No skirt. Just
okay.
I
got
the
you.
Biffle bug type deal. Strike King's got their
swing head.
Yeah, swing heads, but I like the football style head, like on the swing head, more than I do the V shape or whatever that is they've got. But it just seems to roll better in the rocks. But I've caught a lot of fish doing that.
Tim, what about you? Are you fishing a big plastic worm differently than you would fish a smaller worm?
Yeah, sometimes I like to fish it a little slower, especially if it's brush piles. If it's isolated, I may milk it just a little bit more. I think one big tip to the viewers watching, and I know what I saw Keith hold up too, very similar. But a lot of people think of a big worm in a big ribbon tail. A lot of times, if you're fishing brush piles, that ribbon tail, because of the way it's designed, it can grab those limbs and just kind of hang up. Or a straight tail worm, this is a big 13-inch worm, that we have at Profound Outdoors. This big eagle's nest worm, and I like it because it's segmented. So if I want to make 10 inches, I can come up here and cut a little bit off of it. But as you notice, it's a straight tail worm that's going to come through and not grab. And then, the big, this is our big Sandy. We named it after Kentucky Lake, but a similar deal. Just
Can we go full screen on that?
Just almost like a oversized trick worm, but it's going to have that straight tail. And all of this stuff is hand poured, which makes it softer. I remember the one that Kentucky Lake that a guy was selling there, that was that big 20-inch worm, and it was hand poured. And it goes back to what Keith was saying. You can fish this big stuff all you want, but if you can't penetrate a hook set, you're not going to do good. You really got to be careful. And this is like a big lizard that we have, a big hand poured. This is a 13-inch lizard. We sell a lot of these to California, but again, it's one of those things. This is a little bit more plastic, so you're really going to want to go up to a big 7/0 hook and really have line that you can, low stretch line that you can penetrate and get a good hook set on. But I think that's my biggest tip. I like a ribbon tail worm. I like it a lot for certain situations, maybe open water ledges. But if it's brush piles or I'm coming through timber, I don't want that tail to grab when it comes on a limb and just kind of, it's just like it does when you're fishing on the bank. You know, it'll grab those limbs and not fall through the brush.
I want everybody's, or a couple of you guys have already mentioned the fact that that's a lot of plastic to break through, especially if the bass has inhaled a whole worm in his mouth. But before I do that, I want to get to Keith and see if Keith fishes a big plastic worm differently than he fishes a smaller one.
No, I'm with these guys. It's pretty much the same techniques. I will say a few things that I'll do differently, just depending on. It more depends on the type of cover you're fishing and also what the fish are doing. So, you know, if you get into a good school of fish and they're biting every cast, you're trying to get the biggest one out of the school, I'll fish my worm as aggressively as I can, you know, like lots of, not necessarily dragging it at all, just popping it, trying to get attention. A lot of times I'll trigger a bigger bite and then just, you know, focus on what type of cover you have. You know, for me, if I'm going to fish a man-made brush pile or something like that, I'm probably going to throw my worm on a Texas rig. I'll throw straight tails like a bullworm, like what Tim said. I'll throw big ribbon tails, just kind of, you know, whatever the fish really seem like they want to bite, that's what I'm going to throw, but I'll mix it up. But then, you know, if I get in more of an open cover situation, just say I'm on Rayburn, I'm just fishing a red clay point or something like that. You know, I'll pick up like this is a striking bullworm. It's on an owner pivot head, and this is like what Paul was talking about, like what, you know, Tommy shows. I just reel it just like he did with the Biffle bug. I'll just reel it along the bottom, and it has a great action to it. And then, you know, like for my real big stuff, this is my big shaky head. That's a Strike King. They make a swinging structure head, and they make this big Magnum head right here for like the big 10-inch bullworms. But in an open water situation, I think this type of presentation is better than your standard Texas rig, just dragging that along the bottom or hopping it occasionally along the bottom. So I think that's the main things. You can fish a big worm and a smaller 7-inch worm exactly the same, but just, you know, really try to pay attention to what kind of cover is there and let that kind of dictate your action and also the way you present it and rig it.
Keith, you were the first one to mention it, and it registered with me right away. That's a lot of plastic. That bass inhales, let's say, the whole worm. Now you not only have to get through the regular diameter of the worm with your hook set, you may have to get through a whole bunch else. Is there a timing thing with a hook set on a big plastic worm, or are you just letting it rip as soon as you have the bite, or how are you guys handling that? Keith, let me start with you.
Well, yeah, that's kind of a tough question, because just say I'm going to throw like the worm I picked up a few minutes ago, that 12-inch Zeus worm. You know, I probably, generally what you're going to feel is one thump or two thumps when that fish eats that worm. After I get that indicator and I know the fish has got it, my line's moving off, I'll probably give it a couple seconds, and then I'm reeling and swinging at the same time. And that's something that, like, I can't tell you how many times guys got in the boat just at Amstead. We're Texas rigging flats, and getting that timing down is so critical. You know, you think about it like this: just say you're fishing down a bank and you flip a jig to a stump. A lot of times that fish will eat that jig and he'll move off 5 feet. Well, that's not a big deal to compensate for when you only have, 20 yards of line out. But when you have 60 yards of line out in 20 foot of water, that fish is running. You got a lot of slack in your line. So I think the biggest thing, definitely choose a worm that you can get a better hook set with. So not the big thick things. And for me, that give it a couple seconds. You don't want the fish to swallow it. You don't want the fish to blow it out, but just a couple seconds. And then when you decide it's time to set the hook, I'm reeling and pulling at the same time. And that'll put a lot more fish in the boat.
Tim, how about you? How do you compensate for all that plastic?
Yeah, I think if you're feeling that pop continue, you've got a smaller fish, which that's those are the tail breakers we call them. It's going to rip into your plastic off. But I think I had a buddy tell me one time he's not toting it under his fin, you know. So if you watch a bass in an aquarium a lot of times or anything else, and they grab a soft plastic, that second inhale is always gold. I mean, it's like everything comes in. And I think it's a feel, you know, just like the guy said there, it just like what Keith said, it's a feel. If you feel a steadiness, he's swimming with it. You know, he's not still chewing on it. But I think we all probably in a big plastic may delay a second or two more than we say we would a jig or a small shaky head, just because you're dealing with a lot there. The most important thing, the most important thing is making sure you've got all the slack out of your line. That all that line out. And I like a big rod, man. I like a 7.6 or 7.10. You know, when I'm fishing a big worm, because we're making long casts. You know, we're making long casts, and that gives you more availability to really reel up and in a high gear ratio. You know, 8:3 to 1. That's not something you want a 5 to 1 or a 6 to 1 on a big worm.
I want to get to the rods thing in a little bit and ask y'all your favorite setups. But coming back to what you were saying about the big rod, Tim, do you like the 7.6, 7.10 because most often you're fishing this thing in deep water? Would you use the same rod if you were fishing it in 5 feet?
Yeah. Well, it's leverage more than anything. You know, we all reel down to set to hook in some form or fashion. Some people come sideways, some people come straight up. So you're handicapping yourself using a 6.5, 7 foot rod on any structure fishing that you're not, maybe outside of jerkbait fishing and things like that. But it's just more leverage. You know, when you reel down and you set the hook and you've got 6 more inches that you're moving it from front to back, that's a lot of line taken up. And I think that's just a big help there.
All right, Paul Elias, 132 pounds, 8 ounces, says that you have been very successful setting a hook on a big plastic worm.
Hey, got hands, son.
What is your go-to technique to handle all that plastic?
Well, you know, one of the main things I think, I don't know if anybody touched on it or not, I don't think they did, but having the proper hook on that size of bait. And I use like a 6-aught, but it's a Gamakatsu, but it's more of a swim bait style 6-aught hook actually. But what I do is, I don't know if you can get in tight on this or not, but
yeah, Nathan. Let's see if Nathan can isolate you there, Paul, and make that bigger. Nathan, I think is Nathan even awake? ETC.
Yeah, there it is there. But this space in here, I feel like is something that is very important to have that much space in a bulky plastic. But I like to come all the way through the worm and then just pinch it back in the plastic. It stays weedless,
Gotcha.
but it's exposed to where you can get a good hook set, because it is a lot harder to penetrate, a piece of plastic that's over a quarter of an inch in diameter or something, So I mean, to me, that's, choosing the right hook's important. And on Falcon, I was throwing a Carolina rig with the 12-inch worm, and it's something that when you do it, it's effective, but you've got to go to a heavier weight than you normally fish a regular size worm with, just for casting purposes, because that 12-inch worm, of course, depending on the size leader you're using too, but that 12-inch worm is going to grab a lot of air and fight you when you're casting. So you're going to I go to like 1.25 ounces at least weight, and if I'm going to be using like a 3-foot leader or something like that with a 12-inch plastic, so you do have to go to a heavier weight. But of course, when you're doing something like that, like I was doing at Falcon, I was just dragging that big weight and worm through the rocks, and kept pretty slow. And it was, to me, a Carolina rig is the most effective way to fish a soft plastic, because you feel the cover before your bait gets to it, so you're more or less, especially when you've got maybe a novice with you or somebody like that's not that good at fishing, it's probably the easiest setup for somebody to use because, when you tell them, hey, when you feel that weight touch something, get ready because the next thing that's coming through there is your bait. So, that's probably when you're going to get a bite. So, when you know that you can feel that weight in a place that's possibly a fish's house or whatever, it primes you to be ready to set the hook. So I just feel like it's a most effective way to fish a soft plastic if you can get away with it.
Let's jump to gear. You guys are opening my eyes on a lot of things and showing me that the big plastic worm thing is a lot more expansive and broad than I really thought it was. I mean, I throw a big Texas rig around here in Florida, but we don't have ledges in Florida. They were outlawed some time ago. This is a ledge in Florida, as you guys know so well. But let's get into gear if we can, and let me make short work of this possibly. Can I assume all you guys are using fluorocarbon? Is that your go-to for a big worm?
It is.
Yeah. Well,
It
20 pound.
it depends on, like if I'm using a Carolina rig, I'm gonna use braid on my reel and a fluorocarbon leader.
Braid all the way down to the swivel.
Yeah, and
Gotcha.
I just feel like I get a better hook set with it. Now, if I'm in a real clear water situation, I may change that up. But normally when I'm fishing a Carolina rig, I'm going to have braid on the reel if I can get away with it.
But for other applications, Texas rig, anything else, you're going to use fluorocarbon.
Yes.
Gotcha. I'm sorry, Keith, I interrupted you, sir. You were talking about line size on the fluorocarbon.
Yeah, generally 20. I like 20 pound Seaguar in VizX. That's kind of a good, size for a lot of the places I'm fishing now. Like I will go down to like a 15 pound in VizX in certain situations, especially like when we're talking about like reeling those worms on like your swing heads and stuff like that. When you're kind of reeling on a tight line anyway, I think you can get away with a little, but a little lighter line. But a lot of times that 20 pound is what you really need to set the hook. I think, because you always run a risk of breaking off a fish on the hook set. So I'll beef up my line to 20 pound a lot of times.
Gotcha. And Tim, how about you? What's your go-to?
Yeah, 17. I use fluorocarbon as well. Bass Pro Shops, XPS, fluorocarbon, 17 or 20 pound test. Probably 20 more than any other size. Yeah.
And Paul, on your leader on the Carolina rig, which I know you throw a lot on the big worm, how big is your fluorocarbon leader? Typically,
I usually use 17 or 20, and sometimes like if I'm around bigger fish and I'm using a Carolina rig, I'll go to a copolymer or even monofilament on the leader just because I do want a little bit of stretch
a bit of give,
where I won't pop my line with that braid. But I use Ball Sacks fishing line, which is their tarantula is a copolymer and their white peacock is a fluorocarbon. And I with their fluorocarbon, theirs is a 19 pound that I use, and so but that's pretty much what I'll use as a leader when I'm using the fluorocarbon.
On the braided main line, Paul, are you going really stout like a flipping line, or are you going 30 or 40 pound test?
I won't go any less than 30, but I don't really think it matters. I think you can, whatever you're comfortable with. I don't think 50 is not going to change the number of bites you get between 30 and 50. I don't think it matters.
I guess you'd lose a little casting distance maybe on 50, but is casting distance typically a concern?
You wouldn't. I don't think you wouldn't really lose much on between 30 and 50, and not enough to worry about if you're using a big weight on a Carolina rig.
Gotcha.
I got a question for you guys, slightly off topic, but in reference to line, do any of you guys flip or do any of these things with braid to fluoro leader?
I do on spinning rods. Obviously, we all do.
Right. Everybody does with a spinning rod, pretty much.
Yeah, I remember Alton used to do that a lot. I don't. If I'm heavy cover braid, I'm pretty much all braid. I don't. Some of these guys might, but I don't.
Really, the only time that I like to do that is like if I'm flipping grass, then you need braid just because of line twist. But there's times when I feel like, well, we had a tournament at Cayuga, I don't know, 6 or 8 years ago, and I was fishing a flat with 30 other guys, and I felt like if I could get bit on fluorocarbon, or if I could get away with fluorocarbon, I get a few more bites, and so I switched up to that braid with about a 3-foot fluorocarbon leader, and I think that gave me more bites. But I couldn't just use straight fluorocarbon because of the grass and just the line twist of that bait. Just you're constantly flipping; it's just constantly spiraling to the bottom. So in that situation, I used it, but it's just kind of a niche deal.
Gotcha. Thanks.
All right, guys, we talked a little bit about rods. And I realized that you're doing a lot of different applications, a lot more applications than I realized. I mean, you guys are practically drop shotting and wacky rigging these things. You're doing all sorts of stuff with them. But can you give me one or two of your favorite rod choices for these applications? And Tim, let me start with you.
I use we call it our Rayburn rod. It's an Azuma 7.6, and I use it for football jigs, big worms, and then I like a high-speed reel. I use Johnny Morris Bass Pro reel, either a 7.5 or an 8.3, but I probably prefer the 8.3 a little bit more. And a lot of times that speed is going to help you take up slack to catch a fish. But also, you make a bad cast or you miss a fish or something. It's just you're so much more proficient getting that lure in and back out on the water.
Yeah, it can be a lot of dead water between your target and your boat.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to hustle it back in. Keith, what about you? What's your go-to rod reel combo for a lot of this?
Real similar to exactly what Tim said. I use Lew's. I use a Lew's Hypermag. I use a 7.5-to-1 gear ratio for the same reasons that he described. It is a lightweight reel, and it's a very sensitive reel. I mean, I can feel bites through the reel. I like that about the Hypermag. And as far as the rod goes, I like a 7.5 or a 7.6. The one I'm using right now is a Lew's LFS extra heavy. It's a 7.6. It's not, it's not I can use the same rod actually for flipping. So that kind of gives you an idea of how stout that is. I want to be able to set the hook. But that combo right there, I mean, I would probably not throw a Carolina rig just because of line capacity for 20 pound, but like for all of my Texas rigging, casting and reeling a worm or just, hopping it on a standard Texas rig, that's kind of a setup that'll go a long ways.
I guess big swim baits and Carolina rigs are keeping the round reels in production, aren't they?
Well, no, there's a low profile. Like we got one called a BB1. It holds like 200 yards of 20, so, or maybe not quite that much, but it holds plenty of line for those, those real heavy techniques. But that's just a consideration for those super long casts.
Yeah, but Keith, I believe the BB1 is only authorized for crankbait throwing. So I'm kidding. I'm going old school here. I'm going back to the 70s, and never mind. But Paul laughed. Paul got it. Paul, how about you? What's your go-to rod and reel combo for big worming?
I use 8-to-1 gear ratio reel, and I use a 7.7 FX custom rod, and it's an extra heavy, and because I like a lot of backbone and a fast tip when I'm trying to set the hook on those type baits. So it's you can definitely tell the difference. Now sometimes on a Carolina rig, I want a little more tip action than I do like if I'm throwing a jig or a Texas rig worm. I'll use a 7.4 that's kind of got more of a little bit softer tip, but it just seems to load up better and cast better. But when I'm just throwing a Texas rig or jig, I like a fast tip.
Because the bait's so big, because a hook penetration can be a challenge with that much plastic, are you guys tending to make maybe shorter casts than you might with other applications? Or are you handling all that
Hail Marys, Ken.
with a heavy rod and a high gear ratio reel to help you catch up better?
Well,
See, all you guys have been interviewed by me many times before, so you know how tedious I am.
Well, I think it depends on, it depends on a lot. Like Keith was talking about fishing that worm around brush piles. And it depends on how close you can get to that brush pile without feeling like you're going to do any damage to spooking the fish or anything. But when you're concentrating on, it's different than it is with a crankbait, because with a crankbait, if you're trying to get down to deeper fish, they're going to be your point of contact is going to be closer to the boat because you got to get the bait down. But as far as fishing a big worm or something, it's just a matter of how close you can get to where the fish are located that you're not going to spook them. I would want to get as close to them as I could. I would like to avoid a long cast with a big diameter bait, but sometimes you can't.
Tim, do you factor in cast length with this technique, or pretty much
I think
not
it's
a big deal?
I think it's what you can get away with. You definitely don't want to be right on top of those brush piles, but you do take into consideration too. I'm probably not going to throw a Texas rig as long as a Carolina rig. I don't know why. There's just something about a Carolina rig hook set you don't lose a lot of fish. I don't know the logic to it by the way that weight puts a little bit more pressure before you set the hook. But I don't know why, but the strike catch ratio on a Carolina rig is so good. But I think that has a lot to do with it, what you can get away with, and how close you can get to the target you're fishing.
Now, a lot of times don't let me put words in your mouth here, but a lot of times I'm thinking that you guys are throwing a big plastic worm in the same places you're throwing a deep diving crankbait. So are you, because of that, often at that same distance? And let me start with you on that, Keith, because you've got such a big reputation for of those techniques.
Well, so that's like I'll run one thing. I run on my electronics. Humminbird has a feature called Range Rings. I think several other manufacturers got that. That helps me a bunch when I'm fishing offshore. And what I try to do is, just of course, you never know where the bite's going to come from on any given cast, but I try to put my target spot about 60 to 70 feet away from my boat. And that's kind of a good standard for me. I would say 60 to 75 feet away. So if I'm fishing a brush pile, that's what I'll put my range ring at. And that's how far I want to set away from that. It's very similar to a crankbait because a lot of times on an average cast, that's when that crankbait will be getting its maximum depth, when it's about that far away. Maybe a little bit further, but in 60 to 80 feet is probably to be more precise. 60 to 80 feet is how far I like to set off of the structure that I'm really targeting.
Is that straight line feet, or is that horizontal across the water surface feet?
That would be horizontal just across the water. So that's how it draws the range ring. It'll show your boat and it'll show that 60
Gotcha.
to 80 feet circle around it. So that's just straight across the water. So for deeper water, it would be further away, of course. But
Sure.
Most of the times I'm throwing a Texas rig and probably less than 20 foot anyway, most of the time.
Paul, what about you? Are you? You answered my question earlier about the distance thing, but and you talk about how close you feel like you can get to the fish is where you want to be. Let me ask kind of a related question. Watercolor. Is the big plastic worm a more or less clear water bait? Is it like 2 feet of visibility or more? Or is there a line that you guys draw in the sand on this method?
Well, as far as experience, as far as fishing in real muddy water, I can't say that I've really ever fished these big worms, and like if it was just a real muddy situation. But most of the time, it seems like during the ledge type time of year, you're not fishing muddy water.
Right.
It just doesn't seem like
Yeah.
you are. But so I can't really answer that. That naturally, if the water's muddy, you probably feel like you can get closer to the fish than if it's clear. But getting to what Keith was talking about, he's talking about a distance of 20 to 25 yards from the boat, and when you're relating that to, you talk about using a crankbait or a plastic worm, if you're positioning, you're probably making a 50-yard cast to get that crankbait to the depth that you're going to make contact the fish on. So you're not really having to throw a 50-yard cast with that worm in order to bring it through the wherever your fish catching those crankbait fish. So you really, there's a big difference there as far as, because you might just make a 30-yard cast with a worm to hit those fish that are 20 or 25 yards away from the boat. So, but setting a hook on a big plastic worm 50 yards from the boat is a task. I mean,
Yeah.
you're gonna lose as many as you're gonna catch, probably. So you're gonna want to be closer to those fish than we're talking over 100 feet. So you don't want to be that far away with a jig or a worm, a plastic worm, when you're trying to set the hook in deep water.
Tim, what about you? Is this a technique that's primarily for clearer water, or we pick it up anytime?
I really, clear water, you're probably, like if you went in the summertime to Table Rock, you're probably only going to throw a big worm up to James or up the Kings River or something on the lower end of the lake where the majority of the water is so clear. We're all going to be probably drop shotting and things like that. So to me, a big worm is really those ledge lakes that they're known for. Eufaula, Seminole, Rayburn, Toledo Bend, Falcon, and then of course all the Tennessee River lakes. So I think that is, I call it fertile clean, but really fertile. It has that green look to it. You usually see down about 2 feet. Man, these guys will tell you, when we put in a lake and it looks like that, it gets you going, because you're going to have them set up at a certain depth, and you're going to be able to position. And I tell you what else, Ken, I know you guys have teased your audience that you didn't have this group talking big crankbaits. I'm sitting here wanting to hear these.
Oh, hey.
Big plugs, man.
Well, you too, man. You too. I used to, when I was at Bass, I used to know that Tim was whooping up on him when he would show up for weigh-in an hour or two early.
Yeah, he was known for that.
Order a pizza or something. When Tim won a tournament, he didn't win it by, it's Tim Horton by 8 ounces. No, it was Tim Horton by 12 pounds. And it was just ridiculous. But so no, all three of you guys would have been perfect guests for a deep cranking show. But we did a deep cranking show actually, and
2 weeks
we did
ago.
it a couple weeks ago with David Fritz and Dean Perkins, and we also had Mark Davis. So apologies, gentlemen. You three would have been incredible on that show, and honestly, each of you was considered for that show.
Yep.
But we said no. Let's reach out and do a big worm show with these guys. So sorry. No offense intended, Tim.
No, hey, with those guys, that's a great deep cranking. My goodness, man. Hey, it's funny. I'll tell you a quick David Fritz story, but
yeah,
my very first year on tour, I was fishing an open, and we were supposed to be fishing at Bugs, and they had a hurricane came through, and they moved us to Lake Gaston. A guy named David Ashcraft wanted on a big wiggle wart. But anyway, so I'm putting in at this ramp every morning, and it's like 30 minutes before dark. And David Fritz is there, Team Chevrolet with his truck. And it's the only one at the boat ramp. The second morning, I get there 30 minutes early because all you ever heard was how David outworked everybody, The next morning, I'm there at like 3:30, and his truck deals there. And I think, man, whatever. I'm sleeping out here an hour before it gets daylight. Well, I go to meeting that night, pre-tournament meeting that Bass had, and I introduced myself to David. It's, man, everybody talked about how hard you work. He said, man, you beat me to the boat ramp every morning. He said, no. He said, that I'm staying at that house right there next door. That's just where I was leaving my trailer and truck. And his boat was tied up to the dock the whole time. So.
That's awesome. All right. I'll bet you that Paul and Keith will agree with me on this, but Tim Horton is known for doing the best imitations on the tournament trail.
Oh, man, I don't know about all
No. Let's hear your Tommy Duffel. Let's get your Tommy Duffel right now.
I've been in here all night. Hey, but look, so, I got to tell a funny Keith Cone story too. So Brian Robinson had this, what was it, Keith? K9 for Cops tournament. And he had all these football players there and country music stars, and they're auctioning this all off. And Keith goes for like $5,000 for somebody to fish with him at Rayburn. And we were all like 1,500 or something, everybody's. And I kid you not, Luke Combs had just like, he had this song that maybe was on the top 100. Nobody knew. He went for $200, guys. So, the biggest country music star, Luke Combs just gets started. Keith outdid him by about $4,800 over raising money for that. I thought that was pretty funny.
I was there for that event, Tim.
You remember Luke? Everybody's like, who's this guy? He went Nick, and 2 years later, he's entertainer of the year every year, so. Anyway,
that's hilarious. I'd pay more for Keith than for Luke, just for what it's worth.
Especially on Rayburn, for sure.
anywhere in America.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if it's Paul McCartney, all bets are off. I might ramp up for McCartney. But anyway, all right, we're off track, but I like it. Yeah, you guys have some amazing stories to tell, and don't hesitate. Do not hesitate. Yeah. Throw them in there where you can. BTC, I know you wanted to talk about some other techniques than maybe just Texas rigging or something.
Yeah, I wanted to follow kind of, any alternative rigging you guys might do with a big worm. Power shotting, which I know is probably a stretch. If you guys ever mess around with that, or free rig with a big worm. Anyone?
I power shot a big worm a lot.
All right. Okay.
I picked that up from Lintner a few years back and started trying it. And I tell you, where it really pays off is in Florida. And I've caught a lot of good fish using a power shot, just pitching into reeds and stuff like that, because it'll fall through there really, really easy, and it just seems like it gets more bites. I've done it dragging it on ledges and things. It's in my arsenal all the time now. And another thing that I do, if you might want to zero in on this, I don't know, but these bigger
stick worms,
I use these things a lot on ledges, and I'll put it. This is like a 3/16 ounce weight screwed in the head of that worm, and I use a weedless Kale type hook.
Yep.
But with a O-ring on the worm, of course you got to go with a bigger O-ring, like a 7/16 inside diameter. I think is what it takes to get over these bigger stick worms. But dragging that, especially if there's any current around or anything like that on the Tennessee River lakes, but dragging these on ledges, it's something that they don't see a lot, but that will get you some bites when a lot of that other stuff won't.
Is that basically like a 7-inch Senko?
Yeah, that's a 7-inch Senko,
Yeah.
and
It's a hot dog.
Yeah, catches a lot of fish.
Yes, it does. How about free rigging? Anybody try that with the big worm?
What's really the difference between a free rig and a Texas rig? Come on.
Ken, you are married to a Japanese princess. How dare you insult the culture like that?
I've seen it in a pool. It doesn't do anything different.
Wow.
I haven't done the free rig much yet, but I do use the power shot a lot, like what Paul was talking about. And actually, a lot of times in Florida when we're fishing around the spawn, that's a really good alternative for a big Texas rig too. You know, something that sets, and I've seen that on bedding fish a lot too, where they don't want to take it off the bottom. They just want it 4 or 6 inches above that bed. So that's a really good time to fish that power shot. That big Nego rig like Paul had, I've been wore out. Somebody sitting right by me on a ledge, and I'm fishing, you know, conventional Texas rig, and they're throwing that and just catching them. So I would definitely keep that in my arsenal. I've got a few that, you know, I always have tied on. Like, you know, this is my big shaky head on a Strike King bullworm. That's a real good open water one for me. The pivot head, like we talked about that a lot earlier, and that's just a good way to cover a lot of water really with a worm. I like to just reel it. I don't do anything more than just reel it, make a long cast so I can keep that bait in contact with the bottom and just reel it along, and that worm just kind of rocks back in there behind it.
Keith, how heavy is you throwing that?
So I'll go as much as a 3/4 sometimes. This is a 3/8. But that's probably my standard rig, a 3/8 with an 8-inch bullworm. But I'll go as heavy as a 3/4 sometimes, especially if I'm around a bigger fish. I think bigger, heavier weights get bigger bites. I've always felt that to be true. And then just a lot of times on my straight worms and my ribbon tail worms, just a standard Texas rig, and I'm 1/2 ounce to 3/8 ounce tungsten weight, and I peg my weight almost all the time when I'm fishing a Texas rig.
Now, this came through earlier tonight from A. Arducci on the message board. He said, before pegging a big worm, be sure to get consent. Just
Tim, what about you on alternate techniques other than traditional Texas rig? We got sometimes you just got to pretend that BTC is not here. That works for me.
Carry on.
Tim, what you got?
Shoot, this is good stuff here, Brian. So I think a lot of things that people talk about that's different, and I'm showing this as a color, not the lure, but this is our big lizard. I wanted to show a color, but Keith was holding it up, Paul was holding it up. You see a lot of reds and plums. We call this our raspberry. And I don't know why. If you think about it, you don't see a lot of people flipping those type colors. But when we're fishing, and it's probably got to do with what Paul talked about, water's cleaner when we're ledge fishing in the summertime. But there's something about, whether it's Tequila Sunrise with that red in it. I know it's a big deal at Rayburn. The Tennessee River Lakes, man, at Wheeler a few years ago, everybody's throwing big worms with plums. And so there's just that red tint. There's something about it with big worms that you see a lot of people using.
Tim, are a lot of the things you're mentioning here, can we find those at profountOutdoors.com?
Yeah, you can. Profound Outdoors. This is all of our, and it's funny when we order bags, you'll see the great big bags that when people have big plastics, because you don't want them to be in the bag folded up. You know, they're gonna stay that way. You can see this one's really straight, and our big lizard kind of the same way. But I love big plastics, and I think anybody that fishes offshore, big worms are a big part of their day. I can think of so many situations of a certain fish. I can remember one vividly at Kentucky Lake. I finished second there in a tournament, but caught like an 8-pounder on day 2 late on the second day on one of those big worms. And it just happens so many times.
Now, I mentioned earlier, all you guys have the great reputations with deep cranking, offshore work, and stuff like that. How often is a big worm your go-to? I hate to call it a mop-up bait, but let's call it a change-up bait when the bite slows down on the big cranker. Is that a big part of the big worm game?
Well, it is, but the thing is, of course, these guys are probably the same way as I am. It's always going to be tied on and laying there to pull through there, and you've got so many techniques now, like the Nico rigs and all that kind of stuff that before you leave a ledge, you've probably shown them 5 different baits if you're being thorough, and trying to get all the bites you can off that ledge. a lot of times I'll pull up on one and I'll know they're there and I want to throw a crankbait so bad I can taste it, but I won't just because I don't want to. A lot of times you won't pull the school to the boat with a soft plastic like you will a crankbait. So I'll start off with a big worm instead of a crankbait just for that one reason. But it's I'm going to definitely pull it through there before I leave a spot. It's just part of the arsenal.
Makes a lot of sense. Tim, what about you? I know you've won a lot of tournaments on deep dive and crankbait. How often was the big plastic worm more of a mop up? Nathan,
This is what I'm thinking of. No, I'm being funny, but to me, the crankbait is always. This is always a secondary deal, but I'm going to tell you, fish get accustomed, especially multi-day tournaments that we all fish. Schools of fish will get used to a lure. The pizza tournament you was talking about at Lake Champlain, they really only showcased the final day, and it looked like I just caught them on a crankbait. The first 3 days of competition, I never even threw a crankbait on those places, and I caught them all on a jig. I get there the last day, and I had fished for 30 minutes and only caught 2, throwing to the same spot. And no forward-facing sonar or anything, so I can't tell other than I'm thinking, man, I've caught them all. And I picked up a crankbait, and it's like I caught them for 30 minutes. It's like they had never, seen another lure. And we see that on lipless crankbait lakes. You especially if you're fishing a place 2-3 days in a row, they get accustomed to those lures. And I think a big worm is just in the summertime, as you called it, mop up, kind of come in, always throw it before you leave. And now with forward-facing sonar, though, you can see a big fish in a brush pile. You can see, hey, he's over here to the right, and you're going to do what Paul said. Pull up there and try to target that fish the first cast, and there's nothing better than a big worm.
Okay, we've talked about the rod, reel, line. I want to get into some of your favorite specific soft plastics, but first, can we talk about hooks? Can you guys recommend some hooks? Keith, let me start with you if you don't mind.
So I've actually been using the same worm hook for probably 20 or 25 years now, and man, that's because it's never let me down. It's a owner offset wide gap worm hook. That's what I like, and for the worms that we're talking about, most of the time a 4 or 5/0 hook.
That doesn't seem well. That's not a gigantic hook. I mean, we see it's for a lot of plastic worms. Guys go to a 5/0. Is that a 5/0 gets you through that? Gets you okay with that, a 12-inch worm?
Yeah, well, like the worm, this worm right here that we've looked at a couple of times. This is the Zeus worm. I'll use a 4/0 hook. That offset wide gap. I mean, the wide gap is necessary for most of these baits that we're talking about. But
sure.
For this one right here, I'll use a 4/0. I mean, the smaller hook, if I can get away with that, I feel like that's a more realistic presentation. It's going to come through cover better. I just, once you kind of get accustomed to looking at your bait, you can rig it on a jig head and say, well, that's not enough bite. I don't know if there's a science to it or not, but, that's like right here. This is a cutter worm on a big owner stand-up head. And, that's just kind of what I'm looking for. I know that if I were to rig it and I only saw like that much of my hook hanging down below it, I would know I didn't have enough bite to catch that fish. But if you can get away with a little bit smaller hook, it'll definitely come to the cover and look a little bit more natural. So, but that's for most of my Texas rigging, that owner offset wide gap 4/0 or 5/0 is what I'm going to use.
How about that drop? How about that power shot?
A lot of times it's the same hook.
Okay.
Yep.
Paul, you showed us that swim bait hook earlier, and well, one of the first things I was thinking about when you showed us that was if you're throwing a slip sinker on there, it's not reaching the head of the worm, and I'm wondering if it's coming through cover as well.
If I'm throwing it's not reaching the head of the worm.
Well, the slip sinker's not coming right onto the head of the worm, and it's got a little gap there. Does that? Well, A, does the sinker beat against the knot and create any issues for you? And B, does it come through the cover as well when the sinker is not capping the head in a conventional manner?
Well, Uh, that I'm using this hook on a Carolina rig.
Okay. I'm that, I probably
So-
forgot you were talking about the Carolina rig
Yeah.
at that.
So if I was actually use the same hook that Keith's talking about, that owner wide gap, and I would probably on a Texas rig on a 12-inch worm, I would use a 5 or 6/0.
Gotcha. So I get it. The swim bait hook makes sense on the Carolina rig. I don't know why I was thinking that you'd be using the same hook on the Texas rig. I ask stupid questions sometimes. All right, Tim, what's your hook recommendation for us?
5/0 or 6/0. The girth of the worm to me has more to do with it than the length of the worm. That's really,
That's
Yeah.
what she said.
yeah, I was waiting on that. Yeah. So that's, that, and I remember Jimmy Houston's show years ago when he talked about that, and the big jelly worm that's so popular. That was one thing about it. It was bigger, toward the top. So you really had to use a beefier hook, but just a lot of these, 10, 11-inch worms, there's not a lot of difference in a 6 and 7-inch worm up top. So the girth of it has so much more to do with it. So probably a 5/0, sometimes a 6/0. And if you really get into something like these big lizards and things, those are situational. Those are where I can see the fish in the brush piles and I'm really trying to get a big bite. Then you're going to go to a big 7 extra wide gap, something like that can really hold all that plastic.
Do you want to mention a particular manufacturer on that, or?
Yeah. Trocar, Eagle Claw, all of their stuff. I really like it. And I've used that. I love talking about that, tiki lobster earlier. The only one that I ever found that would hold it was that big owner, that big 7/0. And so really it varies just, what you're looking for, but the thickness of the lure. That lobster is like a cigar, it's really massive, but there's just something about that bigger stuff. No different than, I remember the very first time we went to Clear Lake and we all bought our $200 worth of ospreys like everybody else did. And after about an hour, you think there's no way, and then you catch one or two on it. It's the most amazing thing you've ever seen. But all of that stuff, that just goes to show you these lakes with the big fish and the big lures, the big plugs. I mean, gosh almighty. Our big Z-Boss 25, you're talking about that, or the 10XD, that thing's the size of a full-grown tilapia in Florida, and so big baits have their place, and a big worm is probably the easiest big lure to use.
Is that because it comes through cover so well, or?
It's not it doesn't have as much drag coming through the water. A big plug, you've really got to, be kind of, I don't know if trained for that's the right word, but your technique has so much to do with not getting more down. A worm fishing a 10-inch worm is not a whole lot different than fishing a 6-inch worm as far as technique and getting a strike, setting the hook. It's very similar and a little bit more easier to use and catch fish on than some of the other bigger stuff.
A long time ago, I did a story for Bassmaster on the history of the Texas rig. The plastic worm didn't do particularly well selling until in East Texas, mostly on Lake Tawakoni, developed a Texas rig. And I was never able to determine who actually started it. But, somebody was cutting a catfish weight in half and turning a sprout hook around and running it back into the bait. And it was a cheap bait that people weren't afraid to throw in heavy cover where bass did, and they were willing to slow down, and they caught a lot more big bass on it. Is that still a big factor in why big plastic worms do well? The fact that they're cheap and guys are more likely to throw it into harm's way, and they're going to slow it down?
I don't think many people are throwing it, Ken.
Well, that may be true.
The game has definitely changed, with the advancement in electronics and stuff. The bigger baits, have gone away in a lot of ways. Of course, when they go to these ledge lakes like they did at Kentucky Lake, you didn't really see. You saw some cranking, but it surprised me the number of fish that were caught, on those jig head minnows and stuff like that, and good sized fish, for what
Yeah.
Kentucky Lake's putting out now. And I mean, some of the guys were catching them cranking to start with and stuff, but it's just changed so much. From, of course, with forward facing sonar, it's when you can pinpoint that fish and know you're going to put a bait in front of him, it kind of makes more sense to throw a smaller profile bait at him.
Yeah.
So it's definitely changed the game.
Sure has, and I get that, and but it's still a relatively small percentage of the bass fishing world that has access to that level of electronics, and guys are still mostly fishing conventionally, maybe not at some of the highest tour levels, but I'm hoping that a lot of these baits, I hate to call it a comeback, but I'm hoping that a lot of these baits will start selling better simply because there's variety in the leagues now. You got bass allowing forward facing all the time. You got NPFL prohibiting it all the time, and you got MLF somewhere in the middle. I'm hoping that is a nice spur to the industry and bait sales. What do you guys think about that? I don't want to make this a forward facing show, but Tim, you're in the business with Profound Outdoors. What are you seeing with regard to bait sales?
I think Paul is right, but I also think I think it just comes around. I know when the Alabama rig came out, Paul made it famous and just blew them away there at Guntersville. But for 3 years, if there was a tournament, it was legal to use it, and it was October to March. You got beat if you weren't using it. Now it's not as effective. The fish have gotten used to it. I know Lake Cayuga is one of the most amazing brush pile deep cranking. You would surprise people to know that, but I'm looking at forward facing sonar there a few years ago, and I've been doing the drop shot, shaky head, and I got to where I could really just throw our big Z-Boss 25 down there and just kill it in that school. And you would watch all those yellow perch just jump out of those trees and just kill that crankbait, and those big bass would swim back in, and you'd hit it one time like a jerkbait, and they were smoking it. So I think I think you're going to see people are not throwing crankbaits. I mean, both these guys will tell you this. If lures are not getting used, they're going to get popular again, and I think you're going to see a resurgence with big plugs. As far as forward-facing sonar, I think it's not fair to the fans. That's just my take. I think it's fun to fish with. I don't think it's as fun for the fans. And if the fans are the boys, we can complain or say we love it. We can say we like it. We can say we don't as leagues. And I'm just a fan now. I don't compete anymore. But I think it's hurt the industry from a fan standpoint. And that's just my take from what I hear people telling me. What I see people commenting on my social post is they don't enjoy watching fishing as much if it's not guys fishing patterns.
I think that's indisputable. I don't think that the three leagues would be in distinct positions on that continuum of forward-facing sonar if that were not true. Now, it used to be anything was fair game, and then all three leagues were allowing it all the time. So that was kind of vanilla, and now we have strawberry and chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's pretty interesting to compare those leagues and see the guys that, you look at the standings in bass and those three of those, the three leagues, the three main leagues. And it's really interesting to see how the age gap is performing in that NPFL compared to bass and the Bass Pro Tour. So it makes me wonder, Ken, do you follow any of the high school stuff, college stuff?
A little bit.
Are the high school, is all of them coming up with forward facing? Is it dominating high school stuff?
Yes, sir. It is. I'm not going to say it's all, but it's definitely dominating. And I think that part of the reason you're seeing the differentiation in the standings among the three leagues is, and it's evolving, it's shifting as time goes by and more time is there's been more time where the leagues differentiate. But I'm also seeing the conversation shift. For a while, it was, oh, the old guys can't catch them anymore with the technology. But that conversation is now shifting to the young guys can't catch them without it. And I think that's interesting.
Well,
And I do a lot of work with the NPFL, and I'm honored to do so. Those are some fabulous people. It's cool to see Tyler Williams come over and compete in the NPFL where he can't use something that he has a big reputation for at Bass. I admire the kid, the young man, for doing that.
Yep.
well, I don't think it's so much that they can't catch them without it. I think it's more because I've kind of watched, and these young kids are really good,
Yes, they are.
and
I believe it.
and they just know they can catch them better with it.
Yes, no
and,
question.
And I think the argument can be made on the NPFL that the age gap is not. There's a lot more of the older guys fishing the NPFL. I don't know how many young guys are over there too, but it's definitely shows that the young guys dominate the live scope. I mean,
Yes, sir.
I don't know if it's just because the older guys like me are more stubborn to the fact that even though we can use the live scope and are decent at it, we won't go out there with the mentality of, I think their mentality is, if I sit here and look at this thing all day long, I'm going to chase down 5 good fish. Compared to me, I'm going to do it for a couple of hours and say, man, I need to go over here and crank this ledge over here. And I need to go do this. I don't spend my whole day looking at that screen, and those guys do, so it's kind of neat to see. It's neat to me to see that those guys can still perform when they don't have it, but it's also neat to see that NPFL thing be dominated by the guys that used to catch them on the other 2 tours.
Well, and in the top 3 of the NPFL Angler of the Year standings right now, you got Kyle Welcher, Greg Hackney, and Patrick Walters. And we all know that Welcher and Walters have been extremely successful with forward facing, and maybe Greg Hackney less so. But it's cool to see. It's cool to see those guys who can catch in more traditional ways. And my gripe, and I apologize for making this a forward facing show, but I have 2 gripes with forward facing. One is, in the spirit of fair chase, in hunting, they don't allow you to use a drone and claim a record book buck with Boone and Crockett or Pope and Young. If you use a drone, that's not allowed. This is a drone. It's a drone, plain and simple. You can tell me it's not, but I don't believe it. I think it's a drone. I don't like it. I would not consider a world record caught using forward-facing sonar if I were one of the major record-keeping organizations.
How about sight fishing?
Sight fishing is not using technology. Makes a big difference. Second gripe I have about it, and this one will hit home for all you guys, I think. From the inception of the Elite Series in 2006 until the MLF split in 2019, the guy who was the best at catching 5 fish a day was Aaron Martens. Aaron averaged 4.815 bass every day he came in. And you guys know how impressive that is. And you guys were all very good. You guys were all in that 4.6 to 4.7.5 range. You guys were all outstanding. But Aaron was a little bit better on the math. Last year in the Bassmaster Elite Series, the league as a whole was better than Aaron Martens in his prime. That's a box. That's technology. Tim, I see you laughing, but we can't hear you. Nathan, unmute that.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Tim?
That probably is the most amazing thing I've ever heard of a stat, Ken. That gave me chill bumps. That's when you say that everyone in the league is catching more of a limit than everyone.
Well, as a whole, the league as a whole.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, I think, and I love what the NPFL is doing, I do, but I also think that there are some really, really big stars over there that are older. I do. I'm not knocking the younger guys that are in NPFL, but I think there are some absolute hammers over there that are the older guys that are probably competing against obviously not against the competition they are on the Elite Series and not against the competition they are at Major League Fishing. I also think that pro bass fishing has always been a 25 to 40-year-old dominated sport. It just is. You look when these two guys came on, and when I came on, I don't think you would see if it wasn't happening. I think you'd see Trey McKinney catching them. Jacob Wheeler obviously has proven he wins just as much without it as he does.
Wheeler can catch them with or without.
Right. There is some element to what Paul said and what you said, Ken. There's no doubt. Those guys. It's almost like saying, okay, you can't fish offshore and throw deep crankbaits anymore. These three guys on this panel would be nowhere near have the credibility and the legitimacy and the wins and accolades that us three have. And if you take that away from that younger generation, you're going to see a tougher deal because a lot of them, just like Paul said, they don't fish another way. That's what they do. But I also think a lot of them would figure it out very quickly because they're savvy. They're at that age, your processor just works faster. I'm sorry, but it does. And you don't have as much going on in life and you're hungrier and everything about it is, you look at NASCAR, you look at golf, you look at all of them, it's the same way. So I don't know that it's a fair deal to say the NPFL is being dominated by older guys. I think
it's not.
I think it's you've got about 4 or 5 guys over there that are really, really, really top 10% history of our sport competing against a different group than they do at the Elite Series and Major League Fishing. And hey, those guys on NPFL, that's not a knock. You know, that's just you look at the league that the Bass Pro Tour put together a few years ago. That was the biggest buzzsaw. You know, and now a lot of those guys, and there was guys like Keith that was top 5% ever that you know stayed with Bass. That's not saying a differential there, but I think a lot of it we're too focused on the age of the guy more so than the younger guys have always dominated the sport. They just have.
Well, if you look at tournament wins, the average age of a tournament winner in BASS is now and has been for decades within a year and a half of 40 years old. Okay, that hasn't really moved much. The average age of a Bassmaster Classic qualifier for decades has been between about 37 and 41. That still hasn't changed, although I honestly haven't done the math for this year. And the youngest average qualifying age of the Bassmaster Classic was back in the 70s. It's not these recent years. It was back in the 70s. The field was younger then, the sport was newer, and so on. But I agree with everything you said, Tim. I think you're spot on with everything you've said. I think, though, that the most star-studded field I ever saw in bass tournaments was the first year or so of the BPT. And I've told Keith this before. I thought he was the best angler left at BASS. And I still think that was true at that time. I'm glad that there are 3 flavors available now. I think it's going to teach us a lot about the sport and about the fan base and about just what people want to see. Will it ultimately become homogenized again? I expect it will, because ultimately these leagues are, to a degree, have to pursue some sort of financial success.
When was it ever homogenized, Ken?
I want to say this.
From 1968 until 2024.
I'm gonna tell you what happened though. The NPFL listened to the anglers, and they became to a level where it's talked about this year where they weren't. And I think that's important for the leagues to look at. And if the leagues don't look at what NPFL did by listening to what the anglers are saying, which is ultimately what the fans are telling them, then that's what they're going to have to do. You know?
Well, I can tell you that it was the NPFL thing. Although they did listen to the anglers, there was not a formal vote taken. That was a decision made by NPFL President Brad Fuller. It was a business decision. He felt like that was going to be an important differentiator for the league, and obviously it's been right. It's been right, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think the other leagues, MLF struck a middle ground. I thought that was a smart move. Bass, is where they are. where they've limited the screen inches and so forth. Maybe that's the right move for them. Ultimately, the decision is made with eyeballs and ad dollars, as we know too well.
MLF's format for the first time ever makes sense.
With the 3 periods,
Yes. Never got it. Now it makes sense. They were ahead of their time.
but you asked when the leagues were homogenized, BTC. The leagues have been totally homogenized from the beginning until this forward-facing thing came along. The rules were basically the same. I guess you could argue that when MLF came along and started doing the every fish counts format, that was an important and interesting difference.
I get
But
you.
that's it.
Depends what you call homogenized. Bassmaster pretended FLW didn't exist and wouldn't even honor it with a mention.
Why would you mention your competition?
Because you don't have a small dick and you're just like, you're a man. You're just like, hey, they exist too.
NPFL mentions the competition because the competition is an 800-pound, couple of 800-pound gorillas.
Yeah, I never.
Bass was the 800-pound gorilla. Why would you ever mention somebody else if you are?
Because you're
the
confident.
800-pound gorilla. No, because they're insignificant.
No.
Let me tell you a story about BASS in 2006 when the Elite Series was getting kicked off. And wow, we far off big worms now.
Go ahead. No, stay on it. Because this is. Go ahead.
In 2006 or 2005, when the Elite Series was being conjured up, and Don Rux was the head of BASS, I was the senior editor of publications at BASS, and we were talking about who would qualify, who would we invite to the Elite Series. And one of the things that we kicked around, and I can't remember whose idea it was, might have been my idea, was we said, let's invite the top 25 or 30 guys from FLW. A, we could grab some good talent. B, we make them look like our feeder league, because there was a clear distinction between what FLW was. That's where you went if you wanted to fish for a living, and you went to Bass if you wanted to market yourself and be in the business of it all. Well, that's how I saw the distinction.
Right.
And thus ends this hour of the Bass business.
Oh, you got final thought?
No, I'm good. Go ahead. What you got?
No, well, so there was a time back in the day where I was producer of Ike Live, and we would have interviews, and we had a deal with Bassmaster, and they were putting our content up on their website. They wanted our content, and we would send them it. And if it was Larry Nixon or Paul Elias and he was fishing FLW, they wouldn't post it.
Right. Why are you
legends that fished in Bassmaster, but they wouldn't post it? That just screams to me. I don't know any other way to say that, but tiny PP, no confidence, small dick. I'm sorry, I don't know how else to say it. That seemed to me to be very weak.
Here's what Bass
very
did.
weak.
I'm not defending. I'm not here to
admit
defend any
they
of the
exist. Post the statistics of these people.
One of the things I always admired at Bass was we would mention any product an angler used in a tournament, irrespective of whether they advertised with Bass. Did not matter. We'd give them a plug. Now, they didn't always get a plug because sometimes the anglers didn't mention the product, but that's not on Bass editorial.
Right.
But as far as mentioning other leagues was concerned, no, I think that if you're the leader, what you do is you tell everybody you're the leader. You don't tell everybody who the followers are.
Nah, I disagree.
That's why we don't mention a lot of podcasts on our show, because we're clearly the leader.
I got no problem with it.
All right. Gentlemen, I apologize. But if anybody else wanted to comment on any of that stuff, please speak your piece.
I think
BTC is right. Tim said it.
Well, no, it's almost like you could see a side to everything, and I'll say it. There would have never been in my opinion, a Major League Fishing if it wasn't for Little Rock. I mean, it just I don't mean that ugly. That's guys were fed up, and it was what it was. And had the Andersons been in place, there never would have been a Major League Fishing, And I don't mean that to be ugly, but there was so much compromise that happened. If you didn't if you didn't tote the paddle for them, and if you stood up and said, no, hey, this ain't right, Little Rock wasn't going to show you on TV anymore, no matter how much you were catching them. And that culminated into a lot of frustration. And the sad thing about it, the fans need to see, Keith Combs and Greg Hackney compete against Jacob Wheeler and Paul Elias, and the fans need that. I don't know how it's ever going to happen, or if it's going to happen, or if there's figure out a way of an AFC NFC type deal. But it just we talk about this forward facing sonar and everything, and it if you don't do what the fans want to do, there are no podcasts, there are no logos on shirts, there are no TV shows, there are no lives, and the fans want to see the best compete against the best, and we've got to figure out how to do that.
But again, I think it's the leagues that are going to prevent that. And I actually thought 10, 12 years ago that I might try to put together an all-encompassing world championship at ICAST on the Kissimmee chain. Try to do it every year, either right before or right after ICAST, because you got a lot of Bass pros in town. Hopefully they'd pull their boats if the money was big enough. Ultimately I didn't do it because I thought, man, this would be a nightmare. But the leagues are not going to encourage that kind of competition for the same reason that BASS hated that first MLF event that was won by the lone FLW angler in the field. That was embarrassing.
What was that now?
Yeah, what was that?
The very first MLF event ever, I believe I'm right about this, was won by Brent Ayler, who was the only, out of the 24 guys in that field, I think he was the only guy from FLW in that field. And that was embarrassing, I think, to Bass.
We did have the kind of the all-encompassing tournament. It was the TTBC. That was Bass and FLW and PAA. All
and that's exactly, you're right, Keith. And that's exactly what it takes. You got to get a major sponsor that cuts through all the garbage.
Toyota.
Yeah, you get Toyota to play. Now you're talking.
But you know what? If you think about when we did the split, what was it, 2019?
19, yes, sir.
Yeah. But you look at those guys that are on all the stars that are Bass right now, the young guys coming up.
Yeah.
Imagine how long it would have taken them to get to the elites if all of us hadn't split off and gone to Major League Fishing.
What a great observation. Would we even how long would it have taken? How long would they have stuck with it? The Patrick Walters, the Drew Cooks, these guys can catch them anywhere with anybody. These are world-class talents, but how long might they have been held down by an elite series that wasn't hit so hard by MLF in 2019?
Yeah.
Well, I like on your forward-facing sonar debate. I like what Tim was saying 100%, and I think we're at a time where, like two years ago, say two seasons ago, I would have never thought I was at the point where I could say, well, you know what, I'm cranking is my thing, and I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. 20 pounds catching them on a crankbait or catching them on a minnow weighs the same. I'm going to keep doing my same stuff. But I mean, I think that we're now to a point where, like, I understand that on offshore fish, you're going to have a hard time beating somebody that is, like I go out on Rayburn and I pull up to my cranking holes and I can just catch them better with forward-facing sonar and that minnow. Now, do I think that that's the best thing for the sport? No, because like what Tim said, the fans are really starting to voice their opinion more and more on that. And, everybody's got it on their boat. Everybody likes to go out and catch more fish, on the weekends or whatever, but they don't like to watch it. And, when a guy wins the Bassmasters Classic and 90% of the comments are negative because they don't like watching forward-facing sonar, I think that's when things got to change, and I think we'll see some major changes. I just and I don't like getting into the whole, like this is a young group, this is an old group type thing, because, I don't think our rookie class that we had last year is any different than any other rookie class. You got some guys that can catch them doing every single thing, and you got some guys that struggle just like every other rookie class, but they understand that you're not, like if you can find fish offshore, you're crazy not to be using, the jig head minnow and forward facing sonar, because it's just more efficient. I don't like that, but that's going to take over all these other styles of fishing that we've previously done. And I think that's what kept the sport interesting to me.
I think you're onto something there, Keith. One of the things that turned me off to MLF relatively early is with their format, with their every fish counts format, it became a small fish league in a big way. And listen, I'm from Jersey. A spinning rod, like you can't exist up here without a spinning rod, but it became, a wacky worm league. Like so it got, the dynamics weren't there. It became a lot of the same thing over and over again, repetitive, and it was not interesting. And I think that's one thing that's happening with forward facing is I do disagree with you. I think these kids are, unfortunately, I think they are better than we were when we were their age. I just do. I think they have way more tools. They're, just as ate up with it as we were, but they have just way more access to learning and, all the YouTube stuff, everything on the internet and the technology. Their young brains are dialed into that technology. They're just on another level with it. I hate to say it, but I think they're fucking better. But the downside to it is it's the same thing, and that's dull.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you want to see a variety, and I think that's what's kept the sport afloat for so long is that there is a variety. When you take that out of the picture, like last week we had the 10 killer tournament, and Mother Nature stepped in and the lake flooded, then it was dropping, flooded again. The watercolor was all over the place. We had current. The best bite was in the bushes or so shallow that it was more efficient just to catch them fishing. And we had that variety, and I think a lot of from what I saw, a lot of the fans that watched that event, they were relieved. They were relieved to get a little bit of a change up, more back to conventional bass fishing. So I think we'll see big changes this next year. I think it takes a while to make the right decision on that kind of stuff, because like I said, a couple of years ago, I would have never thought that all the things I've learned in the past 20 years really, they're just becoming something I need to forget about. And that's why you see the like our last couple of years of rookie classes doing so good, is that they didn't have that. I go to a tournament and I want to catch them doing all the things that I've done in the past. They didn't come in with that mentality. They know the forward-facing sonar and a finesse bait in their face is the most efficient way to catch those fish. So, that's been something that we've dealt with as fishermen forever. I mean, you got to do what's working or you're going to get left behind. But now we're at a point where you can't just say that, because, the people that make things go around, the fans that buy the product and watch the sport, like I said, they got it on their boats. They want to use it, but they don't want to watch it. And the thing about it is, it's not like every other technique that's constantly evolving. It's pretty simple. Once you've seen it, you know what to do. You see the fish, you put your bait 2 inches above his head and shake it, he's going to bite it. So it's just, I think we'll see a lot of changes in the future, and that's a good thing.
Keith, do you plan to fish? I'm sorry, Tim, did you have something?
I think, gosh, that couldn't have been said better, Keith. And it's about the fans, but Ken, you said it dead on. I remember in the back of Bassmaster years ago, we'd all see these little $25 a month ads that said this lure outlawed in 27 states. You think, silliness, but there is no guesswork with forward-facing sonar. When you take that sense of imagination away from the fans watching of a jig going in a bush or two in a row on a big plug, I'm fixing to catch my third in a row, or am I? Now the sense of wonder of bass fishing is eliminated with forward-facing sonar. I just think that's what the fans are frustrated with. Brian, I want to say this on the rookies too. Like, I agree. But you see classes that come in like what came in on the Elite Series last year that are just incredible. Same thing. I almost feel like you could say same thing on the Bass Pro Tour. Probably not as many, but some really good anglers with Gil and some of them. But like my rookie class, we had myself, Ike, Aaron Martins, Faircloth, Edwin. Skeet was 1 year ahead. So I mean, like you'll see those every 4 or 5 years, something like that happen.
Yep.
And the whole Angler of the Year race that year was those guys, you know. So with Nixon and KVD kind of mixed in that, but I think you see just the way it aligns some years. You see it in baseball, football, you know, everything that there's just some rookie classes that come in that are phenomenal. And I think the one on the Elite Series last year was as good as we've probably seen in 15 years.
BTC, sure. I got some kind of, I don't know, some inside baseball data here on Tim Horton in that rookie year of 2000 for Tim. A lot of people don't realize that he won Angler of the Year that year and there was still a tournament left.
Oh shit!
Yeah. I tell you something. The funniest thing about that, these guys know with Keith and Paul how Dewey Kendrick was. Dewey was nervous that something, you know, you can't do that yet. You can't do that. Well, we had Megabucks at South Carolina, and it was weird that year. It was the only year they allowed you to have a drop tournament, and so like your worst finish got thrown out. And we're going to that last tournament, and my worst event was a 38th, and I thought, man. And I looked at the standings, and I'm totaling all those guys, and I thought, man, I think if I finished 6th at Megabucks, I've won. And I figured it up, and I come in and told Louis Stout. And Louis wanted to break the story, you know, and Dewey wouldn't let him. And I think that's the only time Angler of the Year had been one that the whole public didn't know. But it was pretty crazy.
All right, Keith Combs, I'm going to put you on the spot. In 2026, will Keith Combs be fishing the BWL?
The BWL?
The Big Worm League, man. Come on.
Yeah, I'm always on the Big Worm League. You know that, Ken.
All you 10-inch worms and nothing else. That's all you're allowed to use.
No, I won't do that all the time. But if I could, I would. I will tell you that.
I'm messing with you. I'm trying to bring it back to where we were.
Yeah,
I'll tell you, I love this other stuff though.
I think we got off on a man, we went off left field, and that's your fault, Ken. You brought that forward-facing sonar into this debate. But, I mean, there's some good topics here. But I will say this. So, you know, one of my big sponsors right here in the Rayburn area, Tackle Store, Tackle Addict, they cover a lot of bases. They cover all the stuff we need around here. I talked to Brian, the owner of Tackle Addict, about sales, you know, like because you hear, like, man, crankbaits, and people ain't throwing big worms like they – he's told me that the sales on that stuff is really good. I mean, it's not changed, but what I do see around here is like the boat ramp's packed, but the tournament numbers are way down. That's the thing that's changed so much. But people go fun fishing, and they still want to throw the big worms and the crankbaits and things like that. Or you go fishing with your buddy where it's real hard for two people to operate one forward-facing sonar unit. You know, that's when those things shine. So I think more people are – you know, it's kind of, I don't want to hear that, but less people are fishing tournaments, and they're just picking up the big worm and going fun fishing. That's what's happening around here.
Yeah, a lot of leagues having trouble finding co-anglers these days. Now, Brian Robeson, one of the owners of Tackle Addicts, right? Former NFL defensive lineman, mostly with the Vikings, I think. And the other owner is a Major League Baseball player, a first baseman. He used to play for the Blue Jays, but I can't remember his name.
Brandon Belt?
Brandon Belt, thank you. And is Clifford Weedman still managing the store?
He is. He's your biggest fan too.
Oh my gosh! I'll take all the fans I can get. That's one so far. I got one now. I count them.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Let's talk about some mistakes guys make. Some mistakes us average anglers like myself make when fishing a big worm. What are we doing wrong?
Man.
I would say number one, just like, and I've seen this so many times on guide trips. I mean, you may notice, like, we picked a lot of the same, very similar rods and reels and weights, and it was very similar to that. I would say,
yes.
You know, there's a pretty consistent standard there of equipment. You know, get your equipment right. But, man, the hook set is so important. Like, you got so much line out, and that's important to make that, fairly decent cast. You need to take up the slack, get your timing right, and you need to set the hook. So that's one of the things that I think I saw over the years. You can't do it wrong. You can't fish it wrong a lot of times. There's maybe a better way to fish it, but it'll still get bit. Whatever you're doing will get bit. But when you do get a good bite, make sure you set the hook hard. That's on number one.
How about
great tip?
how about scent? Considering it's a big bait with a lot of body, and you need that fish she got to swallow it. You guys, that's what scent.
I will say, like, if I'm fishing a visual fish on a bed, repeatedly casting to that fish, I do use scent. But a lot of times, there's been times I will say, like, say I'm Carolina rigging, I'm fishing the bait extremely slow. I think scent has helped me in a few situations, catch a couple more fish. But most of the time, I don't use it. Just out of, I guess, maybe just being, I don't know if there's a big need for it sometimes. I think if you're fishing really slow or you're fishing bed and fish, I think you need it.
So, yeah, I think that's consensus. Sometimes it matters.
Paul, what about you? What mistakes do you see from average anglers throwing a big plastic worm?
I think, especially a novice type person that doesn't fish a lot, just, I've done this fishing school thing for several years now. And I think the most important thing is getting them to pick that bait up and let it fall all the way back down to the bottom before they pick it up again. Things like that to me are big deals, and because most of your bites come on the fall and but as far as, trying to everything's got to line up with a big bait. You've got to make a good hook set, and you've got to get the slack out of your line when you jerk and all that kind of stuff. But trying to teach a novice angler to work that bait and get a good hook set it's not easy. But I'll say I've noticed with bigger baits and bigger fish, they just don't seem to drop a big bait. They seem to hold on to it, and it makes it somewhat easier to get a set on.
Okay.
That's interesting. I guess maybe the big soft plastic, there's easier to disguise the hook. And
I don't know if because they went after something bigger, they're in more of an attack mode, and they're trying to swallow that bait, and it just seems to me like they don't, if it's any decent sized fish, they don't seem to drop that big worm.
It's been my experience, Ken. Once they get a hold of it, they don't let go. How about you?
I'm trying to talk to Tim Horton now, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Tim, what about you? What are some of the mistakes you see guys make who are not that experienced?
And you guys, I'm on 2%. I didn't bring my charger, so if y'all do,
Tim, we're not even halfway through the show yet, Tim.
I'm gonna get on my phone and keep watching. So, but I think what we touched on was it just hit 1%. I think what we touched on was the hooks, and I think that's the biggest thing. Is I really like that 5/0 and 6/0. Just not the big giant extra wide gaps on a lot of things, because I think it prohibits getting strikes, getting through cover, and you definitely don't want the little bitty just small wire hooks. So,
Tim, go get your charger, and in the next half hour, we're going to talk about whether or not flashers should be banned.
hey, you know what the flasher was? If we would have took that thing and pointed it forward, we had forward-facing sonar. I mean, that thing was real time. Why did we never take it, put it on the shaft, and point it forward?
Paul will tell you a lot of guys did. The problem was it didn't have the power to get you a great image going that way.
Yeah. Yep.
But guys did try it.
Yeah. I wish I thought of it more.
Tim, you're always thinking. That's one of the things I love about you.
Hey,
Whenever I've had
Have we still got 30 more minutes for real? I'll find a charger if we don't.
You don't know with the show, man. We could have 2 hours left.
Yeah.
Oh my
Hey,
God.
I was only getting paid for an hour. How were you guys getting paid for 2 hours?
Paul, if we could afford Paul Elias for an hour,
Yeah, we need somebody to put on a trivia.
Thank you for joining us tonight, Tim. It's been
Uh-oh.
great having you.
we lost Tim.
Timmy Horton, everybody.
Timmy Horton, Tim, come back. Come back. Staying link will get you back.
It
Unbelievable.
was nice to have him on.
It was awesome to have him on.
Yes, it
BTC, I
was.
know you got some questions for Paul and Keith. And I apologize if we've run long. We always run long, though. Paul will tell you it's a long show, but Keith, we appreciate your time. Brian, what you got? And hopefully we'll get Tim back.
Well, the message board keeps, I see the Inu rig popping up. Does anybody got any thoughts on the Inu rig?
As soon as you tell me what it is, I'll give you a thought.
Googling it as we speak. Let's see. Wait, that's porn. Hold on.
I'm trying to see. I remember I've seen the word INU, right? I think it comes out of Japan, but I'm not sure exactly. Keith, do you know what it is?
No.
Wow, that's pretty bad. None of us know exactly what
It's
it
not.
is. Is it a slider rig basically? Isn't it?
No.
Isn't it where you just hook the bait through the nose and you just throw it out and wind it in slowly? Isn't that the INU rig?
I don't know. Remember that rig where it went through the hook and it caught the worm and then it made the worm do like that?
Is that no? That's not the INU rig. I don't think. Is it?
I don't know.
All right, I'm gonna have
Now
to
we're
do
looking stupid.
the thing that I
Vans
hate to
came with
do.
something like that. I forget what we called it at the time, but
You're talking
I think
about the Paul. You're talking about that screw worm, aren't you?
it wasn't called a screw worm. I can't.
Wasn't it the wacky worm that had a spring in it?
Yeah,
The Springer worm.
Springer worm. Yeah, Springer worm.
So some things are made to catch fish, some are made to catch fishermen.
Okay,
You know,
BTC,
actually, that thing worked pretty good, but the spring got in the way. The spring would mess your hook set up sometimes, but it did work pretty good.
I remember Frank Ulrich called me when y'all were coming out with that. He was so excited. He thought it was going to be the next peanut butter and jelly.
Yeah.
All right, the INU rig is exactly what you're saying, BTC. I saw it at the Classic a few years ago. What you do is, guys, you got to run your line through the worm to like a second hook or something, and when you pull it, you force the worm to wriggle a little bit. The problem
Just a little bit.
well, it can wiggle a lot, but the problem is if you wanted that thing to wiggle a lot, you had to really snap it. And that was the thing
Yeah.
the guys with the test tank wouldn't show you. It's just how hard you had to maneuver that thing to get it to wiggle that way. So it was basically junk.
Wiggle it.
Says the guy in a smoking jacket who, is not nearly the fisherman you guys are.
Something like that could be pretty good if you had the right plastic, where you could just make a slight movement and it would compress and then move back on its own. I can see, yeah, it gets me thinking. I'm learning stuff.
Y'all ever see
I think it's a YouTube rig.
It is, basically. The guys who had it were a joke.
I'm gonna look into it.
I'm calling you out, people. You were a joke.
Oh my God, Ken.
Y'all ever see a drop shot rig where the line going from the hook down to the sinker is some of that really springy elastic stuff? That's got some action.
Say what?
If you rig a drop shot on, but you don't just run the same fluorocarbon or mono back through the hook and down to the sinker. Instead, you replace it with elastic string.
What?
Yeah, elastic string. And that stuff springs like crazy on very little rod tip movement. And it has the most insane action I've ever seen. When
Like
I
a
first
slinky?
saw that. Yeah, but it's not coiled.
What's
But I
the
first saw that 20 some years ago. What's that, Paul?
What's the elastic stuff? What's it?
I don't know what you call it, but it amounts to elastic string. It's got a lot of stretch to it. I mean, imagine a thin rubber band, but it's even easier to stretch and snap back. You might have to use a little bit heavier drop shot rig to keep it in contact with the bottom, but I'm not talking about really heavy. I'm talking about maybe 3/8, and that thing would just go nuts. And you could put it on a bed and make that thing dance like crazy.
I bet.
But anyway, I don't know where BTC is, but he's gone, which is good. I got you guys all to myself. I was hoping Tim would come back too, because he was talking about a trivia contest. I want to enter. Gentlemen, what else do we need to say about big plastic worms?
I think we've covered a big plastic worm pretty good.
I think we have two, plus forward-facing sonar, plus the state of the industry,
Yeah.
plus I've discovered that Keith Combs doesn't know what the BWL is.
I do
So-
now. I do now.
And I'm expecting you to be the first guy to sign up, Keith. You'll dominate. All right.
Oh,
No Scoper League.
yeah, no doubt. BWL.
BWL. All right, BTC, BWL, BTC. I'm all questioned out.
I think I am as well. The drop shot, power shot, and the big worm. That's my personally my big takeaway from tonight. Something I want to do a little bit more.
They've caught him over 18 in Lake Biwa on a big power shot worm.
Have they really?
Yes, sir.
Damn.
That's a thing. And they also power shot a swim bait a lot in Japan. It's a thing. Gentlemen, cannot thank you enough. I also like to thank you for not just disconnecting like Tim Horton did. I thought that was beyond the pale, Tim.
I liked it. I liked the power move.
That was a power move for sure.
Yes. Paul Elias, dude. We have Paul Elias on again.
Again, Paul, you're too
Love
big a star for us, but thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Paul. Have a good night, bud.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Keith.
Oh,
Dang it.
sorry,
Nathan.
Keith.
It's me now. It's me.
It was,
Just
yeah.
We've been looking for a show to bring you on, man. I'm a big fan of yours. Always enjoy visiting with you. We have spirited conversations, Keith Combs and myself. We don't always agree, but I'd like to think that at the end of the conversation, we're always friends, and we appreciate you, man.
Well, I enjoy being on. It's been a great evening, great conversation, and look forward to doing it again.
You will be invited back soon. Keith protects me at media events. He usually tries to avoid my saying crazy things that will get me in trouble. He's a tremendous ally.
Got your back. Yeah.
He's got my back.
Keith, don't take it personal. What I've learned in life, my brother was like this. Ken's like this. When he says we don't always agree, it's not even that he doesn't agree. It's just he's a contrarian, and it's the lawyer in him. He's sometimes compelled. He has to take the other side.
Yeah.
So even if he most likely he secretly agrees with you, but he has to take the other side and flex his brain a little bit. It's just, just got to stretch his brain out. So
Hey, it's
all
all
good.
good. It's all
Yeah.
good.
I have a lot of excuses, Keith. I have a lot of problems, a lot of excuses.
yes.
Appreciate you, man, very much.
Yeah,
Thanks for your
thank you
time,
all.
Keith. Appreciate it, man. Have a good night.
And Tim's not back, so it's just you and me. You can snap me off.
Look at that.
Oh, man. Who makes that?
Japanese. It's a mega bass worm.
I'm looking forward to heading to Tokyo this fall.
Are you really?
Yes, sir. Yes, I am.
Look good.
Yes, I am.
You got your real gay ID?
I got my real ID with a star in the corner
Oh, yeah?
to prove I'm a human being.
Fuck that, man. I guess I got to get that shit for iCast.
It would be helpful.
Little.
If you're
Why
planning on
would-
getting on a plane, it'll be helpful. But I guess you
What-
can use a passport.
What does it do differently?
I have no idea.
Nah, nobody does.
No clue. Hey, quick plug for our buddy Byron Velvick. Check out his eBay stuff at Byron's Bunker. You can also reach Byron through eBay to ask about his guide service, because he's got guide service listings on there. We're going to talk about that craw creature bait momentarily, apparently.
Sorry.
And also, Byron tomorrow is going to be recording some segments for his upcoming podcast, which is called Fish Tales with Byron Velvick. So check that out. And now BTC is going to show you an enormous craw bait. There it is. It's called the Crawdaddy, the daddy of all craws. Where's that from? Are those claws hollow so that they float up a little bit?
Nope.
So it's really not a great craw imitation, maybe.
No, they're big, heavy chunks of plastic, which apparently is all the rage if you're underwater and you're a fish.
Good to know.
Let's see. Anybody guess it?
It's the craw monster. Beefy craw.
You know what? I don't even know what it is. Never mind. We're not playing that game. I'd have to find the bag, and I'm not doing that right now.
One game we are playing is Bad Comments. But
Yes.
I'm going to let you snap me off.
Yeah. Oh,
Because I got to take a restroom break.
all right. Fair enough. I've got a couple big gulps over there that understand. Ken, thank you.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, thank you. Ken Duke, everybody. Round of applause. All right, folks. I guess it's time for bad comments, right? We'll bring in Justin Moe. Nathan?
For someone to say that the J2 only made it to the live, that's an easy
What's up, JK?
What's up, BTC?
Tell me, buddy. What do we got? What do we got from folks at home tonight?
Dude, I had to call through a lot of bad comments tonight.
What?
Yeah,
What do you mean call through?
there was just a lot to choose from.
All right, hold on a second. Before we go any further, give me a ruling on I brought in one bad comment tonight during the live show.
Mm-hmm.
Went over like a ton of bricks, like
It
a
did.
lead balloon.
It did.
Was it the delivery? Was it the timing? Was it the audience? The panel?
I think it could have just been the panel, maybe the recipient. You know,
Okay, all right.
I thought
mean,
it was a great joke. I mean,
So I brought it up, but all right. Hey, listen,
I wouldn't take it personally.
I'm not taking it personally. All right. Take it
All
away,
right.
kid. What do you got?
Let's get to it. We'll start off with Bobby Colson. Keep it light. Always remember, it's not how deep you fish; it's how you wiggle your worm.
That's right, Bobby.
Great advice.
Every small worm fisherman says that.
Eric Olstrom. Wonder if the panel tonight will be all dudes talking about how to wiggle their worm and no women in sight to tell them how to actually do it.
It's a good point, Eric. I once tried to get a woman on the show, and I was viciously attacked by my two partners. We should revisit that at some time very soon.
You are fake news.
You bastard. No, I'm not. Next.
Devin Willis, this was a good one. Can I get a Livingston lure with the sound of a distressed wife when I tell her I'm fishing again? I don't know. What would you call that one, Devin?
I don't know, but it would scare fish away.
Definitely.
Yes.
Girth can definitely factor into what makes a worm big. Eric Olstrom showing some cards there.
All right.
Blake Rader, suddenly my wife is interested in Bass After Dark with all this 10-inch worm talk.
You know what, Blake? Listen,
I think that's how we get him, BTC.
hold on a second. I got a problem with this comment. Blake, we had you on the show last week. I've never gotten more hate mail than between then and now because you showed up without your wife on the show. You know that's true.
I know that's true.
Yep. Next. Don't do it again,
Clint
Blake.
Walker, we got to throw in a Terry Battisti stray. If you had to live with one TB, what would you choose? Tuberculosis or Terry Battisti? One could kill you, and the other would just make you wish you were dead.
Man. Damn. All right.
That was a deep cut.
That was a deep cut, dude. I don't even know what that had to do with tonight, but damn.
It had nothing to do with tonight, but
Outstanding work, Clint.
it was. Blake Rader again. Some of the bigger females up here in Canada can eat 2 worms at once.
Yeah, man. All right.
Be careful with that worm around the bass hole.
You ain't lying.
Ken is learning about other guys' big worms so he can live vicariously. YouTube cause.
YouTube cause, you are correct. Don't let anything Ken says make you think otherwise.
There we go. Diggs Outdoors. Last time I flipped my worm, I got offers to be in movies. Just saying.
Good work, Diggs.
Blake Rader was cooking tonight. I don't know what got into him. Some chick in Florida set the record for using 1,000 worms in 24 hours. And then Mike on kayak. Blake wasn't that on OnlyFans.
Very nice.
Very nice.
Yeah. Where
Couple
we at?
more. Clint
All right.
Walker. I thought free rigging was when you used your worm without protection.
Damn it, Clint. Clint's 2 for 2, man.
He is.
Nope.
Lunchbox fishing. Last one. We still haven't covered the big plastic worm I found in my mom's bedroom.
Damn. Can we get Lunchbox on to tell us that story? That's a no one. I haven't seen Lunchbox before.
I know. Welcome to Bad Comments, Lunchbox.
Yes, thanks for joining in. Man, it's Lunchbox and Clint. Clint killed tonight. Blake did too, but Blake's he's after last week's performance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like Lunchbox. That was a good one. That was a nice little buzzer beater.
All right, let's give it to the new guy. Lunchbox. If we can get your information, Lunchbox, we'll send you a prize.
Instagram, Facebook, send us a message.
Lunchbox, you got 3 days. Otherwise, we're sending it to Clint.
Definitely deserve a prize if you had to see that.
So how was your week, bud?
It was all right. Tried to go night fishing at Cayuga yesterday and just got absolutely murdered by bugs. So
Did you really?
yeah, it was terrible.
What the hell happened?
Like usually I'm fine with the bugs, but last night was just bad.
Yeah, New York bugs. I mean, that shit gets intense up there. Yo, so we had the mayfly hatch when I went up.
I think it's kind of still going on because I was just getting swarmed by mayflies.
Yeah, dude, they're like little pixies.
Yeah,
They're pretty cool. They live for 1 day.
really.
Yeah, dude.
So
They live for 1 day as an adult mayfly. That what you see, that bug is in that form for 1 day, gets railed, probably on your screen or something, or on your
I was
window,
scraping them off.
and then goes and hits the water and drops the kids off, and that's a wrap. Pretty wild, dude.
That is wild.
Yeah.
It's like their only like point of existence is just to like be food for other things, you know?
Yeah, and just to propagate. They party hard. No, don't last long though. Better to burn out than to fade away, you know what I'm saying?
I feel you.
All right, man. What do you think of this?
That is sweet. That would crush on Cayuga with all the perch we got up here.
You don't even know what that is. What's it do?
Is that just like some sort of twitch bait or something?
It's buttered sausage, dude.
Buttered sausage.
It's a
Oh, that's sweet.
solid. Yo, it does like a
That from
glide bait underwater. No
Yeah.
joints, no noise.
You had fun when you came up here?
Yeah, man. So for everybody that might still be watching, listening, this past week I shot up on short notice up to Thousand Islands, fished with Oliver Nye and his fiance Riley. It was a great time. Fishing's amazing because it's New York. Even if it's bad, it's still better than everywhere else because it's New York. They just have extra fish up there, man. If you don't believe it, tell them. Have you ever gone fishing and not caught a fish?
Yeah.
But you had to think about that. You had to seriously think about that's more than just like that happens a lot around here. Not just like you had to dig back deep into your memories.
No, I feel you.
Yeah, Jersey sucks. Anyhow, that was cool going up there fishing with Oliver and Riley. Riley can absolutely catch them. She's a badass.
Yeah.
And her was she in the boat when you fished? Oh no, she wasn't, right?
No.
That's a shame for you. Yeah. Riley looks great when she's fishing and she can catch them. And she doesn't lose them either. Me and Oliver were having the big ones get off, but she was fucking landing them, of course. But
That swim bait with the spinner on it that you guys were using was really cool.
oh, the divinator.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where's that motherfucker at?
What kind of depth were you guys fishing that at?
Dude, burning it.
Yeah.
Absolutely burning it.
That's what he was having me doing when I was fishing with him. Like he was just burn everything.
Yeah. They were reacting.
For sure.
Yeah, and that thing tracks straight. You know, I was throwing some other baits, throwing chatterbaits. I was getting chatterbaits to fucking hunt like crazy. Smallmouth didn't want it. I mean, I've caught some, but they wanted that shit straight.
Yeah.
And if you broke stride, you know, at the wrong time, you'd see this huge boil behind your bait as they like disconnect it. They just wanted that bait running straight, burning fast.
When I went muskie fishing a couple weeks ago, the only action I had was just big swim bait, just as fast as I could possibly reel it, just burn it. Had
Really?
one follow it in, and the second, I just gave it a little bit of hesitation. It was
Gone.
Yep.
What were you throwing?
It was this. I forget what the name of it is, but it's like a big, 8-inch G-Rat soft plastic bait.
8.
It's pretty sweet.
That's a finesse bait for muskie, bud. Oh, here it is. For anybody that might still be watching, here's the Divinator. This is a bait by Biwa. This is the smaller one of the two sizes that we were using. God, that gummit. It's a tail spinner.
Oh yeah, that's sweet.
Yep. We're just ripping that thing. It's got a top hook, treble hook. It's basically a minnow style bait for guys listening on the iTunes with a top hook, a treble hook on the belly, and a blade on the back. And we was burning. All right, man. Who do we pick? Lunchbox. Get at us, dude. Give us an address. Ken will send you something. If not, it's going to Walker. All right. Any final words?
That's it for me, boss. Appreciate you.
Right. You got it, man. Thank you, Justin Kingsley. All right, everybody. Thank you for. Sorry about that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Thank you to Keith Combs, Paul Elias, Timmy Horton, Livingston Lures in the Bass Tank. Thank you to Nathan Benson and Kirby Kingsley, James Riley, for that right there, and Ron Stallings. Thank you to you guys listening and watching the show. Appreciate you guys. Really do. It's been a cool ride. And we got another show next week that no idea what it is. July 3rd. Damn. Bass After Dark. We got the people, the guests that you want to hear from, even if you never heard of them. And now it's time for Dark Thoughts.
The top 10 things only bass anglers can say. Number 10, I don't care if she's missing an eye, I still want to mount her.
What?
Number 9, look at the gut on her, she's gorgeous. Number 8, she slammed it so hard I almost lost my rod. Number 7, jerk, jerk, pause, jerk, jerk, pause. Number 6, she choked it. Number 5, that big girl was locked on the bed.
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Number 4, I stick 'em, but I don't eat 'em. Number 3, no matter how many times I dragged my worm across her nose, she wouldn't budge. Number 2, I spent hundreds of dollars just to feel a tug. And the number 1 thing only bass anglers can say, give me that sweet beaver.
Fooled you guys. And now, it's time for Dark Thoughts.
Did you go outside last night? Nah, one night. Nah, it's extremely bizarre. Nah. Definitely shock and disbelief.
And now Dark Thoughts by Brian the Carpenter.
This guy's naked.
I shall dangerously tread into political waters at this time if they're consuming alcohol for the last 3 hours. And this isn't an endorsement or a detraction from either party, because I could give a fuck. This is just my opinion, my thoughts, my observations. You know, some shit's going down right now with Trump's big, what the hell is it called? Big, beautiful bill or whatever, where they want to sell off all this national parks and private land. And it's pretty effed up. If you're an outdoorsman, as far as I understand, okay, I'll say that. I don't know the exact intricacies of the bill, but it looks like there's this bill in place that wants to sell off, you know, our national parks and our, like, for what? To who? I'm highly offended by it, okay? And I voted for Trump. And listen to me. When I grew up, it was considered rude to ask somebody who they voted for, right? Now it's this whole identity. And that's pretty ridiculous. It really is. I don't allege myself to either party or anybody, you know, and none of you guys should either. I think that's ridiculous. And I think that's the problem. It really is. Like, for the last 4 years, and I observe for the last 4 years, what I observed, any criticisms thrown out there on social media towards that existing, you know, presidency, any criticism thrown towards Biden was met with, yeah, but Trump. And it's like, that's hard R. That's retarded, man. Seriously. Like, if you don't have the ability to separate yourself, and as somebody that voted for Trump this time around, I am very disappointed in seeing that you know, that he's trying to sell off our public lands, our national parks. And you guys should be too. Every single one of you, regardless, should be disappointed, upset, infuriated by that, and you should be calling them out for it. If you're not, you're no better than the but Trump people that are on the other side, as it would be. You know, be better than that. Because at the end of the day, dude, nobody in DC is on your side. So you're not a Republican, you're not a Democrat, and you shouldn't call yourself that. You're you. So whatever. That's my ramblings. I've had enough. Nathan, get me out of here.
So